By day, he snacks on skewered grilled crayfish. By night, he munches on sizzling iron plate crabs, sipping on beautifying crucian carp soup, while palm hearts merely serve as dessert. This is Ed Stafford's daily routine. In this episode, Ed Stafford arrives at an equatorial island in Borneo. Before the challenge begins, he seeks survival tips from the local Iban tribespeople. Though it's last-minute cramming, it's still better than knowing nothing. To show respect for the locals, Ed Stafford again wears only shorts. As he begins his survival challenge, he's dropped at an elevated clearing deep in the jungle, where he'll fend for himself for 10 days. With jungle temperatures nearing 40 degrees Celsius, losing 3 liters of sweat hourly, finding water becomes his top priority. Ed Stafford descends into thick jungle, choosing the most promising direction for water, beginning his trek through the undergrowth, the occasional thorn piercing his bare feet. After an indeterminate time walking, he notices mosquitoes feeding on his feet, a promising sign since mosquitoes breed near water. Pushing forward dozens more steps, he finally finds water, but stagnant pools, too risky to drink untreated. With sunset in 1 hour, time becomes critical. Soon he hears the welcome sound of flowing water, a proper stream. Now shelter becomes urgent. Initially planning to build in the massive roots of a giant tree, he discovers an ant colony while clearing ground, forcing relocation. He finds a palm-rich area instead, palm fronds being ideal shelter material. His design, a geodesic dome shelter, bending saplings into semicircular frames, using vines as rope to bind them, then layering palm thatch as roofing, completing his barely habitable shelter. Before full darkness falls, he drinks directly from the stream. No time for filtering or boiling, returning to find mosquitoes swarming, becoming their mobile blood bank, resulting in a sleepless night. Day 2 focuses on firemaking, determined not to be mosquito bait again. Finding dry tinder proves difficult, until discovering an abandoned Special Forces camp, yielding useful materials. His method, bow drill technique, using rope found at the camp. Despite vigorous sawing, only smoke appears without flame. Pausing fire efforts to forage, he finds wild ginger, eating the edible dark roots, pleasantly flavorful. Also harvesting thorn-covered palm, a reliable food source. Beating off spiny branches with a stick, he extracts the edible palm heart in under 1 minute, rich in vitamins and carbs, far tastier than unknown alternatives. Refreshed, he resumes fire-making, this time producing an ember, but damp tinder extinguishes it. Washing his face to regroup, shifting focus to protein, he crafts a simple trap, slicing a found plastic bottle in half, inverting the top as a funnel, using ants as bait, deploying it in the river. While waiting hours for results, he rests in the shelter. At dusk, checking reveals 1 crayfish, then discovering an abandoned military trap containing several more crayfish, ravenously eating them raw, crunchy like chicken. He can't stop devouring them. That night, he gathered a large bundle of palm leaves and covered himself completely with them. To avoid mosquito bites, he didn't mention how effective this was. The next morning, feeling refreshed, Ed Stafford decided to make one final push to start a fire. But during the attempt, he accidentally snapped the bowstring. His mood instantly plummeted to rock bottom. Determined to regain some sense of accomplishment, he turned his attention back to improving the shelter. Collecting numerous palm fronds, he effectively doubled the shelter's size. With his confidence restored, he repaired the bowstring for a 4th fire-making attempt. After 30 minutes of vigorous friction, smoke began rising from the base. The tinder, dried by body heat, finally caught. This time, Ed Stafford successfully made fire. As the small flames grew stronger, he grinned ear to ear at the camera. Using a soda can as a cooking pot, he eagerly brewed himself ginger tea. The first hot sip instantly revitalized his spirits. That evening, he cooked river-caught crabs on his makeshift iron plate, enjoying his first proper cooked meal since the challenge began. With survival basics now secured, the following days focused on protein hunting, exploring upstream along the river. He surveyed new areas for resources. In one previously unexplored riverside section, he discovered an animal trail. This would be perfect for traps, he thought. Springing into action, he used a sapling near the trail as a spring. With wire scavenged from the abandoned Special Forces camp as cordage, he constructed an effective snare trap, designed to catch and even hoist passing animals. While waiting for potential catches, he tended to his festering foot wounds, gathering 8 jungle vines. He wove them into a makeshift hammock, securing both ends between shelter trees. He tested the crude bed. Firm but tolerable, he concluded. He also wrapped his wounded foot, with fabric torn from camera packaging, to keep it dry. Venturing out again for food, he caught a small beetle. Without hesitation, he popped it in his mouth and crunched away. The meager snack barely provided energy, but as he searched for more, rain forced him back to shelter. Fortunately, both shelter and fire withstood the downpour, which continued until morning. Facing the camera, Ed shared, "I had this incredibly vivid dream last night about catching game in my traps. I think it means I'm syncing with the jungle's rhythm." Skipping his usual tea, he eagerly checked the snare, only to find it triggered, but empty. After resetting the trap, he turned attention back to aquatic food, using his own feces as bait. Yes, really. He set 2 bottle traps in the river. Hours later, both traps delivered, providing several fish and crustaceans. He prepared fish soup in his soda can, boiling the catch with wild ginger for 3 minutes. "The best thing I've tasted in days," he raved. After drinking the broth, he devoured every scrap of fish, skin, bones, and all. Nearby, 12 crayfish roasted on sticks, their crispy shells giving way to tender meat. Pound for pound, way more protein than beef. On his final morning, following the "if I suffered, so should others" principle, he dismantled the shelter before dawn, claiming to return the jungle to its original state. And with that, this survival challenge came to its successful conclusion. Everyone laughs at Ed Stafford being the starving expert, but in this challenge, his meals are actually too good to be true. Catching a 60-pound deer, cooking 4 deer legs in a fire pit until fragrant, taking a bite with his mouth full of venison, eating until completely stuffed, grasshopper kebabs on skewers, munching on diarrhea-inducing wild rhubarb, sipping self-made nettle tea, guarding the fire while gnawing on deer legs. This time, Ed Stafford arrives in Romania's Carpathian Mountains, dubbed Europe's last wilderness. The crew salvaged a helicopter from a scrapyard to drop Ed Stafford on a clearing deep in the forest. Since nighttime, temperatures here drop near freezing. Ed Stafford exceptionally wears shorts for this challenge. As the helicopter fades into the distance, for the next 10 days, Ed Stafford must fend for himself here. With his passive skill activated, he prioritizes finding water above all else. Carrying his gear, he heads downhill. After 30 minutes of hiking, the sky darkens with clouds. This isn't good news for Ed Stafford. With a clap of thunder, rain begins falling, forcing him to abandon the water search and focus on building shelter. Fortunately, there's a fallen spruce tree nearby. Its branches snap off easily. Ed Stafford arranges broken branches along both sides of the trunk, then layers leaves on top, creating a basic shelter. Sleeping directly on the forest floor would drain body heat rapidly. Ed Stafford finds abundant sphagnum moss nearby. Extremely soft, perfect for bedding, but currently soaked by rain. He gathers armfuls of moss, laying it on rocks to dry. Having not drunk water since the challenge began, Ed Stafford already feels mild dehydration symptoms. After dark, temperatures plummet. Lying on the damp shelter floor, he tries exhausting himself to sleep. After hours of shivering uncontrollably, the cold becomes unbearable. He moves outside, doing exercises to generate warmth, thus barely surviving the first night. At dawn, he continues downhill seeking water. Noticing numerous blueberries in the bushes, Ed Stafford picks a few to taste, finding them surprisingly sweet. After sampling berries and hiking another few hundred meters, he finally hears the welcome sound of flowing water. A stream lies ahead. No need for filtering or boiling. Drinking directly from the water's edge actually ensures maximum cleanliness. With the water crisis solved, Ed Stafford selects a nearby riverside clearing to build his shelter, first erecting a tripod with logs and bark, then stacking numerous branches against two sides, finally covering them with dead leaves, completing the shelter. Ed Stafford wants to make fire today, determined not to freeze another night, gathering dead grass roots for tinder. On his return trip, he stumbles upon a bird's nest. Perfect tinder material. Back at camp, he carves a depression in the fireboard, this time using the simplest hand drill method, collecting pine resin from a nearby tree. He coats his hands for better grip pressure, then begins drilling. After untold effort, a spark finally appears. Ed Stafford transfers it into the bird's nest. Perhaps because he hadn't brushed his teeth, the spark mysteriously dies. The next attempt produces flame, but it extinguishes quickly, nearly driving Ed Stafford mad. Realizing the tinder was too damp, he should have dried the grass on rocks before building shelter, thus condemning himself to another freezing night. On day 3, Ed Stafford immediately gathers armfuls of dead grass, spreading it on rocks to dry. While waiting, he forages for energy-boosting food, first appearing on camera, a butterfly, which Ed Stafford pops into his mouth. Without asking consent, prioritizing calorie intake, scouring the grassland, he spots edible plants with carbohydrate-rich roots, digging one up to taste, describing the flavor as like refrigerated dried carrots, but providing some energy nonetheless. Collecting several, he plans to roast them before eating. By dusk, the grass had completely dried out. This time, everything was perfectly prepared, and making fire naturally came easily. Ed Stafford moved the fire to the shelter's entrance, placing the foraged food over the flames. Even when roasted, it still tasted bitter. He knew eating too much would cause diarrhea, but he was simply too hungry. Before he knew it, he couldn't control himself. Soon enough, his stomach began churning violently. While gathering firewood, he had to relieve himself 3 times. At this rate, without finding a reliable food source, the challenge might end in failure. So on the 4th day, Ed Stafford ventured further from camp. He heard deer calls from the woods ahead, spotting one descending the valley's left slope. If I could catch one, he thought, the next few days would be secured. Hunting directly seemed too difficult and unrealistic. The best option was setting a trap. Nearby, he found fresh deer droppings in a meadow. Using this as a starting point, he scouted the area, soon discovering an animal trail. Placing a trap here would maximize success. He fashioned a spring from a sturdy sapling and laid a trigger mechanism with sticks. Any animal stepping on it would be caught in the tightening snare. After camouflaging the trap with leaves, he knew results would take time. Returning to the meadow, he targeted easier prey, grasshoppers. Catching 5 or 6 in one go, he skewered and roasted them over the fire. 10 minutes later, crispy on the outside, tender inside, the grasshopper kebabs were ready. Their rich aroma burst in his mouth with each bite. Craving something warm, he decided to brew tea. Peeling a large sheet of waterproof spruce bark, he sealed the seams with makeshift glue, charcoal, and sap. With his bark bowl complete, he filled it halfway with river water. Directly heating it over flames wouldn't work, so instead, he dropped scorching stones into the bowl, using their heat to boil the water. Adding nettle leaves, 3 minutes later, Wilderness brand nettle tea was served. One sip had him grinning ear to ear. The next morning he checked the trap, uncertain but hopeful. To his astonishment, the snare had caught a full-grown deer. Ed Stafford laughed like an overgrown child. Grabbing a sturdy stick, he approached cautiously. Seeing the deer still clinging to life, he delivered a swift, merciful blow. Dragging his prize back to camp, he remembered the area had bears. To avoid attracting them, he relocated the carcass downwind, several hundred meters away. Butchering required a blade. He smashed a piece of quartz against a rock, selecting the sharpest fragment as a makeshift knife. First, he carefully skinned the deer. Then, after gutting it, he separated the legs and ribs. By midday, his stomach growled fiercely. He grilled a slab of liver on a flat stone, devouring it voraciously on camera. "Absolutely delicious," he mumbled. Packed with iron and vitamin A, he couldn't stop eating. Worried raw meat might lure bears, he dug a pit downwind. Lining it with stones, he built a roaring fire inside. Once the flames died, he arranged the venison legs neatly at the bottom, covering everything with soil. 4 hours later, after tending to the hide, stretching it on a tripod to dry, he unearthed a leg. Squatting, he took an enormous bite. Between chews, he praised his cooking. Suddenly, the sky darkened. Anticipating rain, he constructed a makeshift canopy over the fire, layering spruce branches thickly. 2 days later, the deer hide had fully dried. Scraping off residual flesh, he cut a head hole. Voila! A sleeveless, wilderness brand tunic. Trying it on, he chuckled. In the days that followed, he sat in his shelter by the fire, gnawing on deer legs. Ed Stafford felt his current lifestyle wasn't refined enough. Tomorrow would be his last day here, and tonight, he wanted to enjoy every delicacy this place could offer. He raided the meadow for grasshoppers again, gathered a bowl of blueberries from the bushes, and picked some refreshingly tart wood sorrel from the ground. Back at the shelter, Ed Stafford wrapped some resin and pine needles in a piece of birch bark, rolled it up and lit it, instant candle. As sunset approached, he began his candlelit dinner. First, a handful of wood sorrel salad to whet his appetite. "Amazing," he said. Then he smeared blueberry jam on the venison, making the already incredible meat even more delicious. Taking a big bite, his mouth filled with protein, absolutely wonderful. The firm texture made him want to devour it in huge mouthfuls. After finishing, he poured the remaining blueberries into his mouth as dessert. And just like that, the magnificent feast was complete. When he woke again, it was time to leave. Ed Stafford looked at his shelter and bid it farewell, successfully concluding this survival challenge. This time, the starvation expert really hit the jackpot. Right from the start, he got his dream seafood feast, munching on crispy, chicken-flavored charcoal-grilled hermit crabs, chewing springy, QQ-textured sea snail meat. What was supposed to be a standard wilderness survival somehow turned into living like the Japanese emperor. Kimberley, on Australia's northwest coast, though twice the size of Britain, has a population of only 40,000 a, making it one of the most isolated places on Earth. This is where Ed Stafford would conduct his next challenge. Before starting, a paid Aboriginal elder painted him with ochre pigment, asking ancestral spirits to bless him with fertility. Ed Stafford boarded the production crew's scrapyard salvaged, nuclear-powered speedboat. After reaching the remote challenge location, he expertly removed his shorts and donned pixelated censorship. For the next 10 days, he would terrorize the local protein population here. Ed Stafford first climbed to high ground to survey the surroundings. Besides the beautiful scenery, he noticed a canyon stretching inland was particularly striking. At the canyon's far end, there might still be undried freshwater. Without delay, Ed Stafford set off in that direction. The sharp, spiky spinifex grass made walking extremely uncomfortable. But what disappointed him more was discovering a completely dry riverbed. This was bad news. With daytime temperatures nearing 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit, the human body loses 3 liters of sweat per hour. Ed Stafford could only cling to his last shred of hope and continue deeper into the canyon. Fortunately, heaven favors the bald. He found a stagnant pool, its color resembling iced tea. With no other options, he drank it to solve his immediate needs. After all, malaria is better than dying of thirst. After replenishing his fluids, Ed Stafford continued forward, only to immediately regret it. Just a few steps ahead was another pool, with much clearer water, and sandy banks perfect for building a shelter. With water and shelter secured, Ed Stafford decided to make himself a grass skirt. He found a pandanus tree, trimmed the sharp edges from its leaves, pulled some vines from the bushes, and wove them together with the leaves to make a skirt. With an hour or two until dark, Ed Stafford returned to the shoreline to forage for dinner. It was low tide now. Rocks that had been submerged earlier now lay exposed in the sunlight. Approaching them, Ed Stafford noticed white spots covering the rocks, oysters clinging to their surface. The good news was these oysters could be eaten raw. Ed Stafford squatted down and started gorging himself. Oysters are rich in vitamins and protein, but low in calories. He needed to eat many to meet his body's needs. He got so caught up in eating that he lost track of time. By the time Ed Stafford realized, the sun was already touching the horizon. The journey back to camp was long, so he hurried back at full speed. But the worst possible thing happened. Halfway back, darkness completely fell. Not being able to see the path was manageable, but what really worried him was accidentally stepping on a snake. Fortunately, ancestral blessings worked. Ed Stafford made it back to his shelter unscathed. Tonight he'd have to sleep directly on the sand. The next morning he woke up early. Taking advantage of the cooler temperatures, he returned to the shore and discovered he could walk across to the opposite bay. Based on Ed Stafford's experience, that beach should yield some treasures. And indeed it did. After wading through knee-deep mud, before starting his treasure hunt, Ed Stafford deliberately coated himself with mud as sunscreen. Transformed into a scavenging expert, he combed the beach and found 2 barely usable plastic bottles and an old plastic fishing float. Ed Stafford thought if he could poke a hole in it, it would make an ideal water container. As temperatures crept toward 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit, he wisely gathered his finds and headed back to camp. Along the way, he got a pleasant surprise, discovering a much larger waterhole. Being far from the coast meant no risk of saltwater crocodiles, so without hesitation, Ed Stafford jumped in for 3 refreshing laps. Swimming helped him relax and stay mentally sharp. Around the waterhole grew several paperbark trees. Their thick, soft bark made perfect mattress material. He stripped several large sheets and carried them back to camp. First, he laid some on the ground as a barrier against snakes and insects, then piled more paperbark on top as bedding. That night, he finally got proper sleep. Thanks to his Wilderness Simmons mattress, Ed Stafford woke up refreshed the next morning. Now having 2 water containers, he decided to relocate his shelter to higher ground, near the shore, closer to food sources. Scattered rocks became his primary building material. He stacked stones into 3 walls, added a wooden frame on top, then covered it with spinifex grass. His new breezy shelter was complete. After finishing, Ed Stafford reached for water, only to find both bottles had cracked. The relocation plan would have to wait. Tonight, he'd sleep in the canyon again. The next morning, fire became his priority. The hot, dry climate made finding tinder easy. Ed Stafford planned to use a bow drill. He found an acacia tree. Its tough bark yielded strong inner fibers. Quickly twisting them into cordage, he fashioned a bow drill and started working. True to form, embers appeared quickly. Nestled in tinder, a gentle blow from his 4-day unbrushed mouth made flames leap from his palms. Next, he used a burning stick to melt a hole in the fishing float out, creating a 15-liter water carrier. Using vines as straps, he carried the heavy load to his seaside shelter, a grueling 20-minute trek. Then he transported the fire. Exhausted after these tasks, Ed Stafford gulped clean water and rested briefly. Later, he returned to the oyster-covered rocks, now his personal buffet and daughter, also gathering sea snails and hermit crabs. Diet variety was crucial for health. He roasted the crabs and snails by the fire. After 10 minutes, the crabs were crispy outside, tender inside. The snails were ready too, cracked open with rocks. Their meat proved delicious. At dusk, Ed Stafford sat on the cliff overlooking the bay. Every hardship now felt worthwhile. He'd secured all 4 survival essentials, but for long-term sustainability, he needed substantial meat. So the next day, he crafted a fishing spear. Without proper tools, he fire-hardened a stick's tip, then ground it sharp against stone. 3 kilometers south of camp, he found a promising fishing cove. The plan: stand in shallow water and ambush passing fish. Though fish were present, 2 missed strikes left him frustrated. Prolonged sun exposure became unbearable. Eventually, Ed Stafford gave up, searching elsewhere for food. But the scorching ground and sharp spinifex grass made progress agonizing. With feet lacerated and bleeding, he reluctantly returned to camp to recover. After resting on the ground to regain energy, Ed Stafford set out on another foraging expedition. This time, luck was on his side. Just a short distance from his shelter, he found a baobab tree bearing baobab fruit. He also discovered a small amount of sea salt in a rocky crevice and, luckily, still had some nuts in his shelter. Now he could enjoy roasted nuts. Ed Stafford cracked open the baobab fruit, whose seeds are among the most calorie-dense foods in the world, containing 6 times more vitamin C than oranges. He chewed the pulp, describing its texture as cardboard-like. He then poured the nuts into a shell, roasted them, and seasoned them with salt. The result was a satisfyingly crunchy snack, with a flavor somewhere between almonds and popcorn so delicious, he couldn't stop eating. That night, Ed Stafford was pleased with his meal. On the 9th day of his challenge, Ed Stafford was scouring the beach when he spotted a thick fishing line. Following it, he found a hook still attached. Perfect for fishing. He gathered some conches as bait, tied a heavy object to the end of the line, and smeared ash on his head as sunscreen. He positioned himself on a rocky outcrop along the rugged coastline and began fishing. Unfortunately, hours passed with no bites, and the heat only intensified. Before he roasted in the sun, Ed Stafford moved to a shaded spot to continue his attempt. This time, he could see fish swimming in the trench below, but they seemed to have conspired against him. None took the bait. Frustrated, Ed Stafford's morale plummeted. He had assumed his reputation as a hunger expert would make survival here a breeze, but he had underestimated nature's power. Before returning to his shelter, he took a refreshing swim in the trench to unwind, bringing this leg of the challenge to a smooth conclusion. Originally, it was thought that placing Ed Stafford in the protein-rich African wilderness would spare him from starving. Instead, he mastered a new level of passivity-ignoring 2-ton adult hippos and rivers, clogged with piranhas in favor of gathering figs, raiding a beehive with a torch, and harvesting a chunk of expired black honey. In this episode, Ed Stafford traveled to Botswana's Okavango Delta, a vast wetland spanning over 20,000 square kilometers teeming with wildlife, all of which he avoided. He was instead dropped on a deserted island. Before the challenge began, he sought survival tips from local bushmen and arrived by nuclear-powered speedboat, skillfully swapping his pants for a makeshift loincloth. Over the next 10 days, he would demonstrate how to self-destruct, or so he joked. To ensure safety at night, Ed Stafford planned to find shelter and light a fire. Carrying his gear, he ventured inland, immediately stumbling upon a piece of bone he could use as a cutting tool. The island's dense thorn bushes made progress slow, but he spotted reeds by the river, perfect for crafting a skirt, since he couldn't find suitable footwear material. Aware of the crocodiles lurking in the water, he quickly gathered enough reeds, returning to the shore to weave himself a see-through grass skirt. After trekking 1.5 kilometers, he found a suitable campsite near a shallow area safe from crocodiles and close to fresh water. A nearby tree offered emergency refuge if needed. Next, he focused on fire-making, using dry palm leaves as tinder and a dry stick as a spindle. After over 30 minutes of relentless friction with the bone, he sparked a flame, which he carefully nurtured into 2 fires. That night, he slept between them, hoping the light would deter predators. Yet despite his efforts, the island's challenges persisted. The next morning, a baboon visited from the treetops. Ed Stafford recalled the bushman's warning before his island arrival. These baboons could attack humans. You must shout loudly to assert territorial dominance. The baboon retreated successfully, leaving fallen mangosteens as Ed Stafford's breakfast. But to prove long-term survival on the island, Ed Stafford couldn't rely solely on fruit. Leaving camp, he explored surrounding resources. A flat open area caught his attention. Stepping on it nearly made him jump out of his skin. The grass stabbed like spikes, forcing Ed Stafford to craft footwear. He found dead fan palm leaves, their large flat central sections, perfect for sandal soles. Using the bone fragment, he drilled holes, combined with bark to create flip-flops. They looked surprisingly functional. Not being a professional cobbler, The sandals took half a day to complete. Further along the path, he spotted numerous birds nearby, potentially his primary meat source on the island. With daylight fading, trap setting would wait until tomorrow. That night, thunderstorms erupted, soon followed by rain. Ed Stafford knew the rainy season approached. Fortunately, the drizzle didn't extinguish his fire. On day 3, shelter construction became his top priority. Propping a fallen log as a tripod base, he gathered abundant palm fronds, arranged them along both sides of the log, and tied them with their own stems, creating a simple jungle shelter. Testing it out, he found the interior surprisingly spacious. Additionally, he built a rain cover for the fire, constructing a triangular frame around the flames, then layering thick palm fronds on top. The remaining daylight, he spent making snares from inner bark fibers, producing over a dozen by dusk. Rain returned that night, but Ed Stafford now felt secure. At dawn, he took the snares to set traps. En route, he discovered a long-dead antelope carcass, keeping one horn as a digging tool. Reaching the bird-rich area covered in footprints, he began assembling bird traps. A bent sapling served as a spring, its tip connected to a noose. Ground-level sticks positioned the noose around bait, with a trigger stick below. When birds reached for the bait, the noose would tighten around their necks, hoisting them skyward. Without modern tools, construction progressed painfully slow. By the time 3 traps were set, sunset approached. While awaiting results, he foraged for easily accessible food. Spotting a fruit bat in a tree, Ed Stafford knew capturing it was hopeless. The bat dislodged fruits from branches. Glancing down, he found a fig, containing a grub. For him, this meant bonus protein. Ripe figs tasted sweet, but offered minimal calories. Ed Stafford needed more substantial food. During his search, he encountered a hippo trail, leading to the riverbank. Coincidentally thirsty, he crouched to drink, when strange noises echoed from the water. Zooming in, he saw catfish swarming so densely, they blocked the entire channel. With crocodiles lurking, Ed Stafford dared not intervene, helplessly watching the fish swim away. Crestfallen, he returned to camp. The next day, bird trap inspections yielded nothing. His sandals broke on the return trek. After repairing them at camp, he ventured onto an unexplored path, hoping to find more nutritious food than fruit. To his surprise, he actually encountered something. Ed Stafford found a nest of African bees. Though he desperately wanted to rush over and take some honey, he knew African bees could sting people to death. He could only return tomorrow with proper equipment. Today, he would have to go hungry. Fortunately, this was a common occurrence for Ed Stafford. But on his way back, an unexpected event happened. Ed Stafford encountered an adult hippopotamus grazing in the grass. It was currently the hippo breeding season, and he was alone in the wilderness. If the hippo charged at him, there would be absolutely no escape. Luckily, this hippo showed no interest in him. Soon after, it turned and disappeared into the woods. Its direction of departure wasn't very far from Ed Stafford's camp location. Returning to camp, he thought the day was over. But to his utter shock, that hippo actually barged into his camp. Hiding behind a tree, he didn't dare breathe loudly. He quickly climbed a tree to escape danger. Fortunately, the hippo only sniffed around the camp's edge. Before soon entering the river and vanishing, Ed Stafford set out at first light carrying a smoldering wood ember. Reaching the beehive, he first lit a fire underneath, then added wet leaves to create thick smoke. To calm the bees, Ed Stafford wrapped the camera cleaning cloth over his head, held a torch in his right hand, and gripped the antelope horn in his left as he advanced toward the hive. Finally, after being stung twice, Ed Stafford successfully extracted a chunk of honeycomb. He triumphantly showed it off to the camera. Taking a bite, he found the honey somewhat waxy in texture, not very fresh, but its nutritional value was still substantial. The bees would quickly repair the comb, allowing Ed Stafford to harvest periodically. On the way back, he discovered a nut grove, collecting a large handful of nuts. With nuts and honey providing sugars and protein, Plus, the trap's bound to yield results given enough time. Achieving long-term survival here wouldn't be difficult. Thus, Ed Stafford successfully concluded this challenge. Soon after, Ed Stafford was to be marooned on Petare Tepui in Venezuela. Its summit, averaging 2,400 meters in elevation, rendered the location extremely remote. The production team acquired an 8th-generation, nuclear-powered stealth combat helicopter from a scrapyard, dropping him off on a mountain peak. Ed Stafford routinely removed his clothes and donned pixels. For the next 10 days, he would seek hardship in the coming half-day. As the challenge began, Ed Stafford needed to get his mind focused quickly. His plan was to find water before dark, build a shelter, and start a fire. His current position was around 1,700 meters, with temperatures at just 9 degrees Celsius. Heading downhill offered better chances for water and warmth. The ground was sticky and wet, requiring careful steps. No sooner had he spoken than he nearly stepped on a coral snake. The snake slithered past just 10 centimeters from his foot. Fortunately, he spotted it in time. Continuing his trek, Ed Stafford saw a dogwood tree. Its tough bark was suitable for cordage, though not immediately needed. He stripped a large bundle, using the inner fibers to weave himself a grass skirt. Additionally, on this mountainside, he found a piece of red jasper. Red jasper could be ground into a knife blade. However, the altitude remained unsuitable for survival. Ed Stafford shouldered his gear and continued downhill. As he walked, he stumbled upon another treasure: a beehive. Many South American bees lack stingers, this hive being one such colony. Ed Stafford moved the rock slab sheltering the bees, effortlessly harvesting a large piece of dark honeycomb. He dropped to the ground and started eating it directly. The honey was sweet, flavorful, soft, and sticky, packing about 100 calories per bite. This chunk of honeycomb should sustain him until tomorrow. Undeniably, this episode started exceptionally well for Ed Stafford. After eating the honey, Ed Stafford continued descending the mountain. After descending about 300 meters, the surrounding environment began to change. Trees grew thicker, and the terrain became flatter. A promising sign. Soon, Ed Stafford followed the sound of water to a river. However, this section flowed rapidly, so he decided against setting camp here. He followed the river downstream to a calmer stretch. Choosing a flat area on the bank for his camp, Ed Stafford gathered young trees that broke easily, planning to build a large lean-to shelter. With the local rainy season underway, he needed a sizable, sturdy shelter to keep his body dry. Working entirely by hand without modern tools, progress was inevitably slow. By sunset, he'd only completed the main frame. Then heavy rain began pouring down. Finishing the shelter before dark became impossible. That night, Ed Stafford shivered under the rain. When completely wet, the body loses heat 25 times faster than when dry. Unsurprisingly, he developed symptoms of hypothermia. With no choice, he used the emergency survival blanket reserved for critical situations, relying on it to endure the difficult first night. The next morning, he rushed to the river to gulp down water. Returning, he began roofing the shelter. He collected large palm fronds nearby, broke their stems into hooks to latch onto the frame. After 3 hours of continuous work, Ed Stafford finally completed the roof. With shelter built, firemaking came next. Most materials in the jungle were damp, making suitable tinder and firewood hard to find. While searching desperately, he slipped and fell by the riverbank. Before he could even complain after sitting up, he spotted an animal carcass floating on the water. Picking it up, Ed Stafford identified it as a paca. Cutting its belly open with a stone knife, he found the meat fresh and red, indicating recent death and edibility. Ed Stafford cleaned the paca by the river, then returned to camp. Now, starting a fire became critically urgent. He recalled seeing an open grassland while descending, likely containing dry firewood. There, he collected suitable wood and tinder. This time, he opted for a bow drill method. The bowstring came from tearing a cord off his grass skirt. Ed Stafford strained every muscle, drilling furiously. After 40 grueling minutes, an ember finally appeared. Placing it in tinder and blowing gently, Flames instantly leaped from his hands. Thrilled by this unexpected success, Ed Stafford couldn't contain his joy. He hung the paca above the fire, smoking it to repel flies and slow spoilage. Then, he skewered leg meat and lungs, propping it over the flames to roast. After 20 minutes, a fragrant, nutrient-rich skewer was ready. The ravenous Ed Stafford devoured it with indescribable relish. This single skewer provided about 500 calories, its protein content far surpassing beef by several hundred times. Having started the morning with nothing, Ed Stafford now perfectly secured all 4 survival essentials. In the following days, he switched to eating broadcast mode. Each morning he roasted a paca steak and gnawed on it, juices sizzling with every bite. A sight beyond description. He even built a smoking rack to preserve the meat, allowing him to snack any time. The meat held roughly 6,000 calories, enough to sustain him for 2 days. Naturally, he didn't just eat during this time. He expanded his shelter, built a rack specifically for air-drying firewood, to prolong the fire's lifespan, and finally, crafted the ultimate luxury, a bed. Using logs for the frame, he tied bark and vines across as a mattress. After 5 hours of labor, he triumphantly left the ground, taking a big step toward modern civilization. Throughout these 2 days of work, rain barely ceased. The river water level kept rising. Ed Stafford's shelter stood very close to the riverbank. If the rain continued like this, his shelter would likely be flooded. But the feared event still occurred. This day, Ed Stafford woke to find the water's highest mark, only 1 meter away from his shelter. Equally troubling, the paca meat ran out last night. He now had to find other food sources. Ed Stafford planned to build a fish trap, using palm leaf stems as raw material. He found a large palm tree, relying on brute force to snap the trunk, and reach the top stems was impossible. Ed Stafford thought leverage might work. Using vines as rope, he fashioned a lasso. Looping it around the palm tree, he slid the loop as high as possible using a pole. Then he pulled hard, bending the palm tree. Soon, the palm tree snapped easily. Ed Stafford sliced off the top stems with his stone knife. While collecting them, he unexpectedly discovered palm heart ejected when the trunk broke. A tentative bite revealed it was crisp and sweet. Rich in vitamins and carbohydrates, palm heart was rare survival food here. Ed Stafford peeled an entire stem and squatted to eat it. After finishing, he took the collected stems back to camp to build the fish trap. The trap mechanism was simple. First, make a hoop with vines. Then split the palm stems into thin strips. Fix one end of these strips to the hoop, sealing the other end to form a cone shape. Finally, bind leaves facing inward around the open end. Any fish lured in by bait would find escape extremely difficult. Easier said than done. Ed Stafford spent a full 7 hours, not finishing until the next morning. For bait, he used a piece of termite nest. The main river current was too strong, risking washing the trap away. Ed Stafford settled for a second best option, placing the trap at the entrance of a small creek. By the challenge's 8th day, rain in the jungle still poured endlessly. Fortunately, Ed Stafford's shelter held strong, and firewood remained plentiful. Sitting on his bed tending the fire kept him dry. With no catch in the fish trap yet, Ed Stafford decided on drastic measures. To obtain protein, he'd previously found crabs, hiding in submerged logs in other rivers. Unsure if they existed here, but willing to risk it, he dove to the riverbed, frantically searching. After a long time, he found nothing. It seemed another hungry day lay ahead. Thankfully, he stated he was used to it. On the 9th day, Ed Stafford checked the fish trap at dawn. This time, it didn't disappoint, catching a fish fry visible only under a microscope. Ed Stafford skewered it on a stick and roasted it back at camp. Eating it, he found it crispy with a chicken-like flavor, remarking it tasted surprisingly good despite its size. He ventured back into the dense forest for more palm hearts, then returned to the riverbank. The paca offal he'd discarded here over a week ago had now bred maggots. Ed Stafford gathered the maggots and took them back to camp, torn between using them as bait or dinner. Ultimately, his craving won out. He roasted the maggots over the fire. The palm hearts placed earlier were already cooked. Peeling the skin, he took a small bite, his first time eating roasted palm heart. Its taste exceeded expectations, somewhat like soft cheese. Chewy, sweet, and warming body and soul, he recommended everyone try it. Finishing his meal, Ed Stafford burped. At dusk, he sat by the river, contemplating like Archimedes, believing he could achieve long-term survival here. Though it would be arduous, this hardship was precisely why he challenged the wilderness to hone himself. Time flew. Suddenly, it was the final day. Ed Stafford wanted to check the trap one last time, hoping for a farewell fish feast. He found something inside. Pulling it out, it was 2 catfish. Again, he skewered them on sticks, propping them by the fire to roast. These fish proved his trap truly worked. Given more time, he could build more traps, achieving protein freedom, and reaching his long-term survival goal. Rich in omega oils and protein, Ed Stafford praised the catfish's taste while eating. He felt his vitality gradually restoring. As the production team's 10th generation, nuclear-powered armed combat helicopter arrived, this survival episode concluded. In this episode, Ed Stafford arrives in the Golden Triangle region of northern Thailand. He acquires an 18th-generation nuclear-powered stealth combat helicopter to escort him and drop him off on a mountaintop. A mosaic effect is definitely applied. As the sound of the helicopter engine fades away, his brain immediately switches to survival mode, prioritizing the search for water. However, the area around the mountaintop has several slopes leading to different valleys, and it's unclear which valley might contain water. Therefore, Ed Stafford decides to leave his backpack with filming equipment behind and, relying on intuition, picks a direction to search toward one of the valleys. Shortly after descending, he sees a concerning sight. The mountain area has suffered a forest fire, likely caused by lightning striking a tree. Ed Stafford, barefoot and unable to move quickly, worries that encountering such a situation during his challenge would be disastrous. He continues downhill, but after an hour of walking, he still hasn't found any rivers or streams. Apart from some bamboo that could be used to build a shelter, he hasn't discovered anything else useful. Just as Ed Stafford is feeling disheartened, he spots a few banana trees about 100 meters ahead. Upon closer inspection, he sees a bunch of bananas hanging from one of the trees. Now, he has food, drink, and potential clothing. Without any tools, the only way to get the bananas is to punch the trunk until it breaks. Fortunately, banana tree trunks are soft. While punching, he extracts some core pieces locals. He then delivers a flurry of punches to fell the trunk and successfully retrieves the bananas at the top. But when he takes a bite, he hears a crisp crunch. Something's wrong. Squeezing it open, he finds the banana is full of seeds and completely inedible. To make matters worse, thunder rumbles in the sky, signaling impending rain. Ed Stafford quickly gets to work, stripping large bundles of banana tree bark to fashion a makeshift banana bag. He then shoulders a trunk segment for water and heads back toward the mountaintop where his backpack is. As he walks, the sky grows darker, with occasional thunderclaps. Ed Stafford makes it back to the mountaintop before the rain starts. He smashes open the banana trunk to replenish his water supply from the core, then shoulders his backpack and heads downhill into the jungle. With no time to build a shelter, he picks a spot under the densest foliage as a temporary camp, piling up fallen leaves as a mattress to spend the night. Luckily, the night only brings thunder, no rain, and he survives until morning. Now, having gone over a dozen hours without food, he notices cicadas crawling on nearby trees. He grabs one and pops it into his mouth. It's smooth, bursts with juice, and isn't as bad as he imagined. Ed Stafford plans to find water and build a shelter today. This time, he sets off with his backpack toward a different valley. Along the way, he picks up some fallen Indian gooseberries. They taste sour but refreshing. The vegetation in this valley is much denser than in the previous one, increasing the likelihood of finding water. Without warning, Ed Stafford stumbles upon a small, trickling stream. Without bothering to filter or boil it, he lies flat on the surface and gulps it down, showcasing his iron stomach. After drinking, he follows the stream downstream and finds a large, flat area to set up camp. This time, Bamboo will be the main material for his shelter, but he needs a knife. He searches along the stream for stones and soon finds a suitable one. About half a mile from camp, he locates a bamboo grove. The bamboo is extremely too heavy with a stone knife. Cutting it is difficult. Through sawing and pulling, it takes him 2 hours to gather enough bamboo and several trips to transport it all back to camp. Using the stone, he punches holes in the bamboo ends, then uses mortise and tenon joints and tree bark to construct the shelter's main frame. He gathers large banana leaves from nearby to serve as roofing, breaking and draping them over the frame's sides. With that, a barely livable shelter is complete. By now, Ed Stafford is covered in sweat and grime. He takes a bath in a pool of water and enjoys a comfortable night's sleep. The next day, he wakes up and starts making fire. This time, he uses the fire saw method. He scrapes some shavings from a dead bamboo stalk to use as tinder, then prepares 2 dry bamboo strips. On one strip, he carves a groove and drills a hole in the middle of it. He secures the tinder over the hole with a small wooden stick. Using the groove as a guide, he rubs the 2 bamboo strips together vigorously. The resulting sparks fall through the hole onto the tinder. After just over 20 minutes of effort, Ed Stafford successfully produces sparks and starts a fire. Yesterday, he dug up a piece of wild ginger and now wants to reward himself with some tea. He pokes a hole in one end of a bamboo tube, adds water and the wild ginger, then places it over the fire. The bamboo's natural moisture and the water inside prevent it from burning. Once the water boils, he pours it into another fresh bamboo tube. Ed Stafford enjoys his first hot drink since the challenge began. With a warm stomach, he feels much more energized. On the 4th day of the challenge, having previously focused on basic survival by relying on plants and insects, he can now concentrate on obtaining protein. Ed Stafford arrives at a clearing some distance from camp, guessing that birds and small game likely live here. He decides to set up a few rock traps first. Using a slightly split twig to prop up a flat rock, he ties bait to the twig's smaller branch. When a mouse comes to eat the bait, it easily snaps the twig, causing the rock to fall and crush it. Ed Stafford uses crickets as bait, hoping to catch a few mice. But traps take time to yield results, and he's already starving. Remembering seeing tadpoles in the pool where he bathed, he returns to try his luck at catching frogs. The method is simple. He just reaches into holes along the bank, not caring if a snake might be inside. Unexpectedly, he actually pulls out a frog. He smashes its head a few times with a rock, intending to skewer it on a grass stem and take it back to camp. But the frog plays dead and escapes. With his meal slipping away, Ed Stafford has no choice but to keep searching the holes. Before long, he catches an even bigger frog. This time, he doesn't hold back. He smashes it hard with a rock, takes it back to camp, and props it by the fire. After 20 minutes, it's ready to eat. He tears off a leg and takes a bite, praising its tender, rich texture. The entire frog is devoured in no time. Since the rock traps haven't yielded anything yet, he decides to make a bird snare. Using a bent sapling as a spring, he attaches a noose. The noose is held open by a ring of sticks on the ground, with bait placed on the trigger stick. When a bird sticks its head in to eat the bait, it disrupts the balance, causing the noose to tighten around its neck and lift it into the air. That night, the long-awaited storm finally arrives. Ed Stafford moves the fire into the shelter. Fortunately, the shelter is sturdy enough to keep both him and the fire safe. But the noise keeps him awake. Once the rain stops, he decides to check the traps despite the darkness. When he reaches the clearing, he finds a mouse caught in one of the rock traps. Overjoyed, he roasts and eats it on the spot. The taste is pungent, somewhat like liver. He doesn't even spare the bone scrunchy and chicken-like. So hungry that he even eats the mouse's head. Over the next few days, Ed Stafford's life stabilizes. He reinforces the camp and plans to craft more tools from bamboo. He carves grooves into both ends of a bamboo stalk, then smashes a rock against them to create cleanly cut bamboo tubes. Using the same method, he breaks off the top of one tube, then shaves a bit from the inner and outer layers of 2 tubes so they fit together perfectly. This way, he makes a water bottle. On the 8th day of survival, Ed Stafford decides to prove himself by living a nomadic lifestyle like the local indigenous people. For this, he prepares his bamboo water bottle, fire saw for starting fires, and a cooking pot. Since his previous stone knife has been worn down from too much sharpening, he needs to find a new one in the stream. But after hours of searching, he still can't find a suitable rock. Left with no choice, he decides to rely on his sixth sense after all. He once used it to find water in the wild. Ed Stafford comes to a fork in the path and, trusting his gut, chooses the left trail. To his surprise, he actually finds a suitable stone in the left section of the river. Seeing that the stone is quite large, he sharpens its edge and binds it between two tree trunks to make a stone axe. He tests it on a banana tree and easily fells it. With the stone axe, he can significantly speed up shelter building during his migration. The next morning, before setting off, Ed Stafford checks his traps to see if he can gather some provisions for the journey. From a distance, he spots that the bird snare has been triggered. A chicken is caught in the noose. He retrieves the chicken, extinguishes the campfire, and sets off into the jungle, carrying smoldering wood shavings in his left hand and his stone axe in his right. Since tomorrow marks the end of the challenge, he needs to cover as much ground as possible today, gathering any food he comes across. Before nightfall, he selects a spot on a hillside for his camp, starts a fire, and prepares his final meal. He skins and guts the chicken, cuts it into pieces, and stuffs them into his cooking pot along with wild ginger and Indian gooseberries. After adding water and boiling it over the fire, an authentic Thai-style chicken curry is ready by sunset. The spiciness of the wild ginger and the sourness of the gooseberries have infused the chicken, making every bite a burst of tangy, spicy, and savory flavors. Ed Stafford can't stop eating. Sitting by the fire and enjoying his meal, he successfully completes this survival challenge. Ever since his last challenge in Botswana, Africa, where he endured 29 missed meals in 10 days, he's been determined to redeem himself. This time, he finally turns the tables, achieving his long-awaited protein freedom in Africa. Feasting on fragrant, tender catfish and sweet berries, then finishing with prickly pear fruit for dessert. What was supposed to be a grueling survival ordeal ends up feeling like a royal Japanese feast. In this episode, Ed Stafford arrives deep in the Akagera savanna of Rwanda, Africa. The many wild animals living here are not to be trifled with. After arriving on a highland via the production team's 10th-generation stealth combat helicopter, he wastes no time stripping off his pants and applying the mosaic effect. With the helicopter gone, Ed Stafford will now spend the next 10 days surviving alone here. Being near the equator, midday temperatures here reach nearly 40 degrees Celsius, making finding water and avoiding the sun his top priorities. The nearest lake is 7 kilometers away, with 2 small hills in between. Heading there recklessly would be unwise. He must first locate a reliable water source nearby. Ed Stafford notices a crossroads in the grass, worn down by animal tracks, and deduces it might lead to water. Following the trail, he finds a large patch of grass flattened by what he suspects are African buffalo. Known as widowmakers, these buffalo cause over 200 human casualties annually, so Ed Stafford must stay vigilant to avoid close encounters. Luckily, after walking a short distance, he spots a muddy waterhole. The animals drinking here may have defecated and passed gas in it, but Ed Stafford's famously iron stomach scoffs at filtration or boiling drinking it straight is the only way to ensure true purity. After quenching his thirst, he coats himself in mud for sun protection. Now, it's time to choose a campsite. Ed Stafford decides to set up beneath a few trees, which provide shade and an escape route in case of danger. The surrounding grassland is rich in elephant grass, which he gathers to fashion a makeshift grass skirt. With daylight fading, he hurries to start a fire. Nights here are bitterly cold, and the flames will ward off wildlife. He selects a suitable log for a fire drill and begins his signature hand drill method. But the fireboard's wood has too high an ignition point, so after 30 minutes of effort, no embers appear. He quickly switches to another piece of wood and spends another half hour before finally producing sparks. Just before nightfall, he gets the fire going. At night, the campsite is surrounded by animal sounds. Ed Stafford remains tense, not even daring to blink. He barely sleeps that night. The next morning, buffalo gather around the muddy waterhole. Ed Stafford doesn't dare compete with them and has to wait at the end of the drinking line. By the time it's his turn, the waterhole is nearly dry. Now, he must find a new water source to survive here. Ed Stafford notices that the warthogs on the hillside haven't come down to drink. Suspecting there might be water up there, he decides to check it out. To his surprise, he's right there's a natural well. After scooping out the surface scum with a handful of grass, Ed Stafford crouches by the well and gulps down the water. Now, among the 3 essentials for survival, only food remains unsolved. He smashes a giraffe bone with a rock to fashion a digging tool. Ed Stafford spots a plant in the nearby grassland. Before coming here, he learned from locals that this plant has potato-like tubers. Using the bone tool, he starts digging. The ground turns out to be surprisingly hard. After over 10 minutes of digging, he unearths a tuber the size of a quail egg. Determined, he keeps digging until he has enough for lunch. He roasts the tubers in the fire. Taking a bite, they taste similar to potatoes and are rich in starch. But the energy they provide doesn't make up for the effort spent digging. With food resources so scarce here, Ed Stafford decides to migrate to the lake tomorrow. Early the next morning, he prepares for the journey. He tightly binds dry grass with fresh grass to make a slow-burning torch. Once lit, it can smolder for a long time. He also coats himself in mud as sunscreen. Without any water containers, he drinks as much as he can from the well before setting off. With everything ready, he shoulders his backpack and heads toward the lake. Along the way, he must stay alert for charging buffalo and avoid stepping on snakes hiding in the grass. Instead of taking the most direct route over 2 hills, he detours around the foothills to save time. After 6 hours of trekking, he finally reaches the lake. Ed Stafford quickly uses the smoldering grass torch to start a fire. Then he heads to the lake to quench his thirst. While there are no buffalo here, the lake is home to many hippos and other potential danger. Fortunately, Ed Stafford soon reaps the rewards of his migration. He finds a patch of berries that taste like sweet raspberries. These berries will provide vitamins and carbohydrates for his survival. Later, he discovers a clearing surrounded by thorny vines, a natural animal barrier. After reinforcing the perimeter slightly, the open space inside becomes an ideal shelter. At night, hippos emerge from the lake to graze. Though protected by thorns and the fire, Ed Stafford is too anxious to sleep. On the 4th day of survival, he plans to familiarize himself with the area. By sheer chance, he encounters an adult hippo about 70 meters away. Unexpectedly, the hippo seems more frightened. It turns and flees into the lake at the sight of him. This reassures Ed Stafford that as long as he doesn't provoke them, the hippos won't pose a threat. Soon he makes an unexpected discovery: a large patch of prickly pear cacti near his camp, already laden with fruit. Carefully, he picks a few. The fruits are edible, rich in vitamins and water. He cuts off a piece and tastes it. Sweet, tender, and refreshing. With prickly pear fruits and the berries, Ed Stafford no longer worries about vitamins and carbohydrates. Now, he can focus on obtaining protein. He discovers that many grouse-like birds live here, and decides to make bird traps. He peels off some tough tree bark and uses the fibrous layer to make ropes. Ed Stafford crafts 3 nooses, a trap design he learned last time. He ties the ropes to bent saplings and props up the nooses with a circle of sticks planted in the ground. One trigger stick has bait attached to its end. When a bird sticks its head in to eat the bait, the noose tightens around its neck and lifts it up. After setting up 3 bird traps, Ed Stafford prepares to build a fish trap by the lake. First, he gathers a bundle of sticks and plants them in shallow water to form a trapezoidal structure, a small entrance leading to a wider enclosure. Behind the entrance, he arranges aquatic weeds into a barrier wall. This way, fish lured inside by bait will struggle to find their way back out. Using termites as bait, he completes the final step of the trap. Now, only time will tell if it works. For now, he survives solely on berries and prickly pear cactus fruits. He expected the traps to yield results overnight, but both the fish trap and bird snares fail completely. After several days without a single catch, Ed Stafford notices his mind growing sluggish. He has to concentrate hard just to form coherent sentences. This is his body's reaction to prolonged lack of fats and protein. He decides to take a walk, which should also help his mental state. The next morning happens to be overcast. Ed Stafford leaves camp to explore further. After walking 2 kilometers, he encounters a troop of baboons. Following their trail, he stumbles into what feels like a new world. A grassland teeming with wild herbivores, peacefully grazing, a scene of utter tranquility. He stays until nearly sunset before returning to camp. From afar, he sees his 3 bird traps remain empty. His hopes for protein tonight rest entirely on the fish trap. He doesn't hold much expectation, but sometimes, when you least expect it, luck strikes. This time, he feels a catfish in the trap. Ed Stafford lifts the fish toward the camera. Laughing heartily, he realizes there's more than one. Reaching back into the water, he pulls out another, larger catfish. Together, the 2 fish weigh about 3 kilograms, enough for Ed Stafford to replenish his protein reserves. Knowing he can't finish both at once, he builds a wooden rack above the fire to smoke 1 fish into jerky for preservation. The other he skewers on a stick and roasts beside the flames. After 9 grueling days, Ed Stafford finally enjoys his long-awaited protein feast. The aromatic fish makes him devour it ravenously. Catfish are rich in omega oils and packed with protein, quickly restoring his energy. Soon, he polishes off half a fish. The next morning marks his departure day. Chewing on fish jerky, he effortlessly concludes this challenge. Anyone who's eaten roasted skunk knows it tastes like steak smeared with feces. Ed Stafford's first desert survival challenge coincided with this delicacy. Yet here he is, snacking on thirst-quenching cactus fruits and chewing mesquite bean pods, turning what should have been a brutal survival ordeal into what looks like a paid vacation. This episode finds Ed Stafford in Arizona's Sonoran Desert, just 45 kilometers from the Mexican border. Countless illegal immigrants perish here annually, attempting the crossing. This time, Ed Stafford aims to teach them how to survive this barren wasteland. Seems this episode carries a political undertone. Arriving via the production team's 6th-generation stealth combat helicopter, Ed Stafford lands deep in the desert. With practiced ease, he strips off his shorts and dons a pixelated loincloth. For the next 10 days, he'll fend for himself here, carrying only a lucky pendant, given by a native elder named Mark. Ed Stafford finds a dried-up riverbed near his campsite. Following this riverbed upstream greatly increases his chances of finding water. He sets off in that direction. Along the way, he encounters several mesquite trees with ripe seed pods. Ed Stafford takes a small bite and finds them surprisingly sweet. But his priority now is finding water, not food. As he moves upstream, he tries to step only in shaded areas. Yet the scorching sun forces him to take shelter under a shaded spot to rest, planning to resume his journey at dusk. While waiting, he notices some dead agave plants nearby. Ed Stafford uses their coarse fibers to fashion a grass skirt. Unfortunately, the mandatory pixelated loincloth still leaves nothing to the imagination. Time flies, and soon the sun begins to set. With about 3 hours of daylight remaining, Ed Stafford must hurry to build a fire, for warmth and to ward off animals at night. He spots a sodal plant nearby, an excellent fire-starting material. This time he opts for the fire plow method, rubbing 2 sodal stalks together rapidly to create friction sparks. After over half an hour of vigorous rubbing, sparks finally emerge. He transfers them to tinder and blows gently with his garlic-tainted breath. Flames soon flicker to life in his hands. By now, Ed Stafford hasn't drunk water for hours and still hasn't found a source. Fortunately, the nearby barrel cacti can serve as an emergency supply. Their fruits are rich in moisture. Ed Stafford gathers some and takes a bite. Cool, slippery, and refreshing, with a texture like sticky cucumbers. A perfect survival food in the desert. After eating, he collects dry grass to use as bedding and successfully endures his first night in the desert. The next morning, he plans to thoroughly scout the surrounding area. Ed Stafford notices artificially carved holes in some rocks, likely made by Native Americans who once lived here. He also spots 3 ravines with dark green trees, a strong indicator of possible water sources. He heads toward one of the ravines. The dense shrubs here suggest shallow groundwater, as their roots are short. But disappointingly, he finds no water. The second ravine is even drier, with soil in the rock, crevices turned to dust by the sun. By now, Ed Stafford's mouth is parched. His last hope rests on the final ravine. From a distance, he sees swarms of insects hovering over it, a promising sign. As expected, he discovers a stagnant water hole, covered in duckweed and buzzing with flies. He consoles himself. It's not the first time he's drunk filthy water. Brushing aside the duckweed, he cups the water in his hands and gulps it down greedily. Immediately, he feels revitalized. Next, he plans to search for food. But first, he needs sun protection. The mineral-rich rocks scattered throughout the canyon can help. Ed Stafford spits on the ground and grinds a rock against it to create mineral mud. This mud has an estimated SPF of 20. He smears it on his bald head before setting off to forage. Around camp, the tops of saguaro cacti are laden with fruit, also edible and surprisingly sweet. Ed Stafford lashes 2 sodal stalks together to make a harvesting tool and knocks the fruits down from the cactus tops. He takes a bite. The flavor is incredible, packed with dozens of times more vitamins than beef. He gathers a large quantity, extracts their pulp, and spreads it in small pieces on rocks to sun-dry for storage. On the third day, Ed Stafford notices clouds forming on the horizon, a first since his arrival. He suspects this might signal the approaching rainy season, and decides to use the cooler daytime hours to build a shelter. The cholla cacti surrounding his camp are traditional materials used by natives for constructing tents, as they're both tough and flexible. Ed Stafford uses cholla and tree bark to create a semicircular tent frame, then covers it extensively with desert broom to form walls and a roof. By dusk, the shelter is complete. Say what you will, Ed Stafford's got skills. Just as he was preparing to sleep that night, the sky suddenly lit up with lightning and thunder. Soon after, rain began to pour. Fortunately, he had moved the fire into the tent in time, so he wouldn't need to restart it at dawn. Ed Stafford noticed that the white depressions in the rocks had filled with rainwater. He plucked a hollow reed stem and used it as a straw to drink his fill. Then, he covered these depressions with stones to reduce water evaporation. Next, Ed Stafford focused on setting traps to obtain protein. He realized the stagnant waterhole would attract many animals in the canyon, so he set up a snare trap along the path and blocked off other routes to the waterhole. Now, any animal passing through this snare would have its neck caught. His other traps were traditional Paiute deadfall traps for desert survival. Using 2 balance sticks, he propped up a flat stone, tightening the setup with a cord. A third trigger stick held the bait, keeping the mechanism balanced. Any rodent trying to eat the bait would disrupt the balance and be crushed by the stone. Over 2 days, Ed Stafford constructed 10 Paiute traps in total. He expected a bountiful protein harvest, but by the 6th day of survival, he still hadn't caught anything. However, that day presented a new opportunity. The stone covering one of the depressions had been mysteriously moved overnight, and the water inside was completely drained. Whatever did this had to be sizable. No small creature could have shifted the rock. Ed Stafford decided to exploit the animal's desperate need for water. To capture it, he found the largest stone he could grade in and set up a Paiute deadfall trap over another water-filled depression, waiting for the thirsty creature to trigger it that night. While searching for shade earlier that day, he discovered a cave. On its walls were ancient Native American paintings, mostly depicting animals and hunting scenes. Inspired by this ancient art, Ed Stafford decided to follow suit. He ground water and rock into pigment and painted a rabbit on a stone, praying that one might stumble into his traps. By the 9th day of the challenge, Ed Stafford's body was desperately craving protein. At dawn, he checked the traps and found the stone had been triggered. Hoping for the best, he lifted it, only to find a skunk inside. Maybe his prayer had come with an accidental fart. Without hesitation, he dispatched the skunk, skinned and gutted it, then placed it over the fire to roast. While waiting for it to cook, he gathered more mesquite pods, crushed them into flour inside the depressions, mixed it with water and kneaded it into dough. He shaped 5 small dough balls and wrapped the rest around saguaro cactus pulp to make pies. He placed the saguaro mesquite pies near the fire to bake alongside the skunk. Soon, both would be ready at the same time. Ed Stafford took the first bite of skunk and declared it delicious, though that might just be the meat deprivation talking. After finishing the skunk, he devoured a saguaro mesquite pie. The rush of starch and carbs made him crave more. He marveled at how luxurious this felt. By evening, rain began falling again. Ed Stafford returned to the cave for shelter. From there, he could see the entire canyon, but a pang of melancholy struck him. He admitted that while he loved the wilderness, he never wanted to live in complete isolation. Family and friends were where his heart truly belonged. As he spoke, a few tears escaped. The next morning marked his departure day. Bringing this challenge to a successful close, Ed Stafford is truly the pinnacle of survival experts. Whether dropped in freezing snowfields or barren deserts, he can always manage to live comfortably, feasting on tender and juicy hedgehog stew, chewing sweet and vitamin-rich wild berries, living in a drafty shelter that's freezing in winter and scorching in summer, and finishing it off with a heartwarming and appetizing cup of hot tea. His life is practically like a paid vacation. In this episode, Ed Stafford takes on the challenge of Mongolia's Gobi Desert. The crew scavenged a battle-worn vehicle from a junkyard, and, with sparks flying and lightning flashing, marooned Ed in the heart of the Gobi Desert. Without using any survival tools, not even his hair, he must fend for himself here for the next 10 days. In desert survival, finding water is undoubtedly the top priority. Ed Stafford scans his surroundings, dismissing the endless plains in sight, and decides to head toward the mountains on the left. Mountains can create rain, and enough rain can form desert oases. Ed straps on his gear and sets off in his chosen direction. Scorching winds howl past him, accelerating his body's water loss. Ed urinates on the ground and judges from the pale color that he isn't severely dehydrated yet. After walking a few more steps, a plant known as wild donkey juice appears on camera. He knows Mongolians drink the juice from its leaves when lost in the wilderness. Following their example, he plucks a handful, squeezes hard, and drinks the slightly sour green liquid. This buys him a little more time in the desert, but to survive, he still needs to find real water soon. Along the way, his feet have been battered by sharp rocks and thorns. To keep going, he must make shoes, but there's no suitable material around. So Ed sacrifices the strap of his camera bag to fashion a crude pair. Though poorly made, they at least spare him from stepping on rocks and thorns. To find water faster, he begins climbing a 300-meter high peak. But to his disappointment, even from this height, the view remains barren. With night approaching, Ed decides to camp on the mountaintop. With no fire-starting materials nearby, he lies on the ground, enduring the cold through the night. The next morning, before the heat sets in, Ed packs up and resumes his search for water. After an unknown amount of time, upon conquering another peak, he spots a lush green valley below. The darker patches of vegetation are the most promising spots for water. However, as soon as he enters the valley, Ed notices a dangerous sign: scattered bones of a camel. This is Gobi bear territory, and he suspects the bear killed it. Considering how rare these bears are, Ed gathers his courage and ventures into the reeds to search for water, clanking the camel bones as he walks, to scare off any bears. As the ground grows damper beneath his feet, a small pool of water appears ahead. Without filtering or boiling, he drinks it straight. With the immediate water crisis solved, he grabs a handful of mud and smears it on his skin as sunscreen. Now, he needs to find a suitable campsite. Returning to the area outside the reeds, Ed finally sees what he least wanted: Gobi bear droppings, and a trail of their footprints. Aware of the danger, he moves farther away and searches for shelter on a nearby hill. He settles under a shaded spot. With time left in the day, he decides to tackle the fire-starting problem. gathering dry wood for fuel, and dead grass as tinder. He crafts a hand drill from a sharp stone. Ed begins methodically rubbing the drill, soon producing sparks that ignite the tinder, creating his dream fire. Tonight at least he won't freeze. On the third day, Ed sets out at dawn to forage. Originally, he only planned to hunt insects, but he stumbles upon a network of burrows with interconnected entrances. He deduces a colony of ground squirrels lives inside and decides to smoke them out. He blocks all but one entrance with rocks and builds a fire outside the remaining hole, hoping the smoke will suffocate them. After waiting for about an hour, Ed pokes a stick into the burrows, but as expected, finds nothing near any entrance. He figures the smoke didn't get inside because there was no wind to push it in. Next, Ed turns his attention to the camel bones, attempting to crack them open for marrow. But once again, he's disappointed. Left with no choice, he risks venturing back into the reeds to search for edible plants. Ed finds some licorice root grass, whose roots are edible. Without hesitation, he takes a bite. The flavor is intense, reminiscent of old-fashioned licorice root, and packed with natural sugars that provide plenty of calories. On his continued search for food, Ed Stafford spots an intact small tin can. After cleaning it thoroughly, it becomes a perfect cooking pot. Luck keeps coming his way. At the edge of the reeds, he finds a large patch of berries eaten by goby bears. Following the survival principle that, if a bear can eat it, so can I, Ed takes a cautious bite. When no signs of poisoning appear, he devours them without restraint, only stopping when the sun is high overhead. On his way back to camp, he fills the can with water, places it over the fire, and adds prepared licorice root and berries. After boiling for 3 minutes, a refreshing cup of hot tea is ready. Ed exclaims that life couldn't be better. After a few cups of tea, he plans to build a stone shelter. There are plenty of scattered rocks on the hillside, but with limited energy intake, he only completes a third of the structure by dusk. His body craves protein desperately, so the next morning, he decides to catch lizards basking under rocks. They barely move until warmed by the sun, making them easy targets. In one go, he catches 4, skewers them on a stick, and roasts them by the fire. After 15 minutes, lizard kebabs are ready. Facing his first protein source in days, Ed eats every last bit, even scraping the stick clean. But this meager meal is far from enough. He braves the scorching sun to search for more food, and luck strikes again. He notices movement under a rock and spots a hedgehog. With such protein delivered to his doorstep, he can't let it go. Ed ends its life with a stone. Having never cooked hedgehog before, he opts for the simplest method, an underground oven. He digs a pit, lines the bottom with stones, and builds a fire on top. Once the fire dies down, he places the hedgehog inside, covers it with wild donkey juice leaves to lock in moisture, and seals it with dirt. After 4 hours of waiting, Ed retrieves the hedgehog. Its spines now peel off easily, revealing more meat than expected. Perfectly tender, fragrant, and juicy. Ed declares it an absolute delicacy. Thanks to this protein-rich feast, the next few days pass smoothly. After 4 days of construction, his stone shelter is nearly complete. He designs the entrance at the back, leaves space for a fire on the left, and carves a hole in the front as a window. With strong winds today, he tries the smoke method again to catch ground squirrels. Near a dry riverbed, he finds a new burrow system, blocks all but the lowest entrance, and lights a fire outside. This time, the wind successfully funnels smoke inside. While waiting, he gathers firewood to finish his shelter. Piling logs over the structure, it actually looks decent from afar. Now, it's time to check the burrows. To his delight, he uncovers one hole and catches a squirrel, then a second, and a third, wiping out the entire family. He cooks them in the underground oven again. By dusk, he sits by his shelter, enjoying the meal. One bite, crispy, with a chicken-like taste, and packed with protein, far surpassing beef. He finishes with berries for dessert. Life keeps improving, and Ed feels he could stay longer. But when he wakes, it's already the final day. His carefully built stone shelter, goes unused as he bids it farewell, successfully completing the challenge. This time, Ed truly outdid himself, starving for 9 out of 10 days, even resorting to eating tadpoles in desperation. But the final feast makes up for it. 4 charcoal grilled trout, a stir-fried vegetable salad with ginger vinegar, and a bowl of strawberries and blueberries. At least he gets a protein-packed meal before heading home. This time, Ed Stafford arrives in Argentina's Patagonia, one of the last remaining great wildernesses on Earth. The crew scavenged an 18th-generation nuclear-powered stealth attack helicopter from a junkyard to drop him off at the challenge location. As the helicopter fades into the distance, he must quickly switch into survival mode. Ed Stafford suppresses the adrenaline surging through his body, forcing his mind to stay calm. Following his usual routine, he would prioritize finding water first. But here, water is the least of his concerns. Meltwater from the snow-capped mountains forms easily accessible streams, allowing him to drink freely. In this era, these waters remain completely unpolluted. Once night falls, temperatures here plummet to near freezing. Building a shelter and starting a fire must be done quickly. The nearby woods make a good campsite, and while scouting, Ed makes an unexpected discovery: patches of clover growing on the ground. He doesn't want to miss any chance to replenish energy. Besides clover, there's also silverweed and wood sorrel, all edible raw, though he avoids eating too much at once, to prevent diarrhea from their oxalic acid content. Unfortunately, the area is swarming with annoying ants. Unable to tolerate the harassment, Ed abandons the woods as a campsite and moves to an open sandy patch instead. The soft sand makes a decent mattress, and nearby shrubs provide some windbreak. From the shrubs, he selects a long, dry branch for a hand drill, carves a fireboard with a stone, and uses vine fibers as tinder. To prevent strong winds from disrupting the process, he builds a stone windbreak behind the shrubs. After vigorous rubbing, until his hands bleed, sparks finally appear on the fireboard. Relieved, Ed gets his fire going before nightfall. As the sun sets, temperatures drop rapidly. On his first night, Ed can only sleep fitfully, huddled by the fire. The next morning, he finds frost on his backpack, proof that temperatures dipped below freezing overnight. But once the sun rises, the mercury climbs back to around 30 degrees Celsius. Ed plans to finish his shelter today, but first, he needs food. Spotting trout in the river, he wades in, attempting to catch them barehanded. With the right technique, trout enter a trance-like state when touched, allowing for an easy grab. But Ed has no prior experience in hand fishing. Though he knows the theory, it takes time to adjust. After 3 grueling hours, he still hasn't caught a single fish. To make matters worse, the thin ozone layer here makes sunlight brutally intense. His back gets severely sunburned. To continue the challenge, he reluctantly opens the crew's emergency supply drop, puts on the included shirt, and soothes his burning skin in the icy river. Now, back to business. Ed gathers logs, sets up 2 tripod-like frames, and spans a crossbeam between them. He then collects armfuls of unidentified grass and layers them at a 60-degree angle over the beam as roofing. A crude, barely functional lean-to is complete. That night, Ed finally gets proper sleep in his shelter. By the 3rd day, only one of the 4 survival priorities remains unresolved: food. Now he can focus entirely on it. Returning to the woods for resources, Ed finds a deer carcass. The flat shoulder blade can serve as a cooking surface, the antlers as digging tools, and the sinew from the leg bones can be made into strong cordage. For fishing, he hauls everything back to camp. Back at the river, Ed notices tadpoles swimming about. To others, they're just tadpoles. But to Ed, they're precious protein. He pops one into his mouth. Disgusting. Maybe roasting improves the taste? He scoops up 2 dozen, stuffing them into his pockets. At camp, he spreads the tadpoles on the deer scapula and roasts them by the fire. After 10 minutes, they're crispy outside, tender inside. Ed tries one eagerly, still revolting, but he forces himself to finish them. Protein is protein. Next, he soaks the deer leg bone in the river for hours to soften the sinew. Once pliable, He pounds it to separate the fibers, peels them strand by strand, and patiently braids them into cordage. Now he has fishing line. Golden thorns from plants serve as hooks. Flipping over a rotten log, he finds ant eggs for bait. With a grass stem as a fishing rod, Ed now has a complete makeshift fishing kit. He assumes the trout will bite easily, but after hours of waiting, not a single fish takes the bait. To make matters worse, a thick blanket of clouds moved in yesterday, bringing an abrupt end to the summer heat. Now, even in broad daylight, Ed Stafford is freezing cold, forcing him to frequently return to the fire to warm up while fishing. With no trout biting after hours of waiting, he braves the cold to search the grass for blueberries. Though small, they make up for it in flavor and abundance. Besides blueberries, he also finds a few wild strawberries. Unfortunately, these fruits still don't provide enough calories. Ed tries hand fishing again, but still comes up empty. Shivering, he just wants to hug the fire for warmth. The harsh conditions force Ed to think outside the box. He decides to build an automatic fishing trap. First, he plants a branch in the riverbed, then hooks a second branch onto it, attaching a line connected to a bent sapling on shore. A baited fishing line is tied to the mechanism. When a trout bites, it releases the hook, and the sapling yanks the fish out of the water. To increase his chances, Ed sets up 3 additional lines near the trap, hoping they'll bring him a proper meal. By the 9th day of the challenge, his efforts finally pay off. The trap is triggered, and 1 trout is caught. Another line also yields a fish. Encouraged, Ed attempts hand fishing for the 3rd time. This time, he applies lessons from past failures, keeping his hands ice cold, to avoid startling the trout with body heat, gently covering the fish before striking. Soon, he successfully catches his first trout. Though small, it's a monumental achievement. Holding the fish, Ed grins at the camera like a giddy 40-year-old kid. He builds a small rock enclosure in the river to keep the trout alive until dinner. Returning to the water, he lands an even bigger one. But when he adjusts the rocks to improve water flow, the fish immediately darts into the main channel. Ed curses himself for being an idiot. Retrieving the escaped trout proves far harder than expected. After an afternoon of chaos, turning the crystal-clear pool into a muddy mess, he finally recaptures all 4 fish. That evening, he roasts them thoroughly over the fire, serving them with a wood, sorrel, and clover salad, and a bowl of wild strawberries and blueberries. Without hesitation, he digs into the charred trout, crispy as expected, devouring every bit, skin and bones included. He can practically feel nutrients flooding his body. Afterward, he chews wood sorrel to cleanse his palate, and polishes off the berries for dessert. A satisfying meal, indeed. When sunlight returns to the valley, it's time to leave. Ed notices 6 new trout have wandered into his rock pool overnight. Now that he's mastered hand fishing, protein is guaranteed, meaning long-term survival here is possible. But as the helicopter arrives, the challenge officially ends. Once again, Ed Stafford proves why he's the hunger-enduring expert who survived the Amazon. For him, entering the wild is like coming home, feasting on sugar-rich, melt-in-your-mouth guavas, munching on piping hot, juice-bursting Mexican redrump tarantulas, and trapping a 3-pound catfish, curled by the fire, savoring his catch. This is survival at its finest. This episode, Ed Stafford arrives in Guatemala's Sierra del Lacandon Mountains. Before the challenge begins, he visits a local Mayan descendant shaman. The shaman tells him his ancestors welcome him into the jungle, but also issues a warning. If he doesn't launch a new survival show soon, he'll go completely bald. Ed's face darkens upon hearing this. After bidding farewell to the tactless shaman, the crew transports him deep into the jungle via nuclear-powered speedboat, dropping him off on a secluded sandbar. As the engine noise fades away, Ed officially switches to survival mode. Almost immediately, the jungle reveals its dangers. Ed spots a line of fresh jaguar prints on the sand, likely made that morning. He needs to leave this beach immediately. But when he surveys his surroundings properly, he realizes the boatman has tricked him. He's been left on an island surrounded by crocodile-infested waters. With no other choice, Ed bravely wades through the water. Fortunately, the crocodiles show no interest. After reaching the opposite shore unscathed, he gathers his gear and plunges into the dense jungle. Ed wants to find a campsite near both water and food sources, which proves more challenging than simply following a stream. He decides to climb a hill for better visibility. With 97% humidity in the jungle and endless winding trails, Ed is soon drenched in sweat. After 2 grueling hours, he finally spots daylight at the summit. Reaching the top reveals a stunning vista. A lake in the valley below would make a perfect campsite. However, Ed's excitement dims when he spots an enormous crocodile patrolling the waters. On the bright side, this indicates abundant fish stocks. Sticking to his plan, Ed begins descending toward the lagoon. Along the way, he finds a crystal-clear stream. Filtering and boiling would be a waste of time. Drinking straight from the source will only strengthen his iron stomach. Reaching the lake shore, Ed selects an open area with good visibility for his camp. He wants to build a shelter and make fire before nightfall. Nearby saplings provide excellent building material, while vines serve as natural rope. Ed plans to construct a simple lean-to shelter. Progress is slow with primitive tools. Just framing the structure takes 2 hours. Gathering enough palm fronds for roofing takes even longer. As darkness falls, the unfinished shelter forces Ed to spend his first night curled on the ground. Waking the next morning, Ed applies lessons from past survival experiences. Before continuing construction, he lays out collected firewood and tinder to dry in the sun. After completing the roof, he crafts a bow drill, using fibrous tree bark for cordage. Despite hours of effort, damp wood stubbornly refuses to produce sparks. When rain begins falling, Ed has no choice but to call it a day. By day 3, starvation forces Ed to pause fire-making efforts and search for food instead. The rainforest proves generous. Ed discovers a guava tree, with numerous fallen fruits beneath it. He pops an overripe one into his mouth. Damn, no human intervention. And they're still this sweet. Ed eats so fast he barely has time for his usual narration. He collects several more for later. Further exploration yields another prize, a Mexican redrump tarantula on the forest floor. Knowing locals consider these a delicacy, Ed won't pass up this protein opportunity. After dispatching the spider, Ed returns to camp and resumes fire-making efforts. The morning sun has sufficiently dried the wood. This time, friction produces precious sparks. Following the familiar routine, he soon has a roaring fire. First priority, roasting the tarantula. After 15 minutes, Ed tentatively bites a leg. Crunch. Definitely doesn't taste like chicken. After devouring all 8 legs, he turns to the plump abdomen. One bite releases a burst of warm fluid. Ed's strangled expression reveals exactly how it tastes. Now among the 4 essentials for survival, only a stable food source remains unresolved. Ed Stafford sets his sights on the fish in the lake, planning to build a raft for fishing. While searching the jungle for suitable logs, he notices an inconspicuous rodent burrow. The lack of vegetation around the entrance suggests there might be something inside. Ed sets up a snare trap at the burrow entrance. When selecting logs for the raft, he specifically looks for suspended deadwood. These contain less moisture and offer better buoyancy. After hauling a dozen logs to the lakeshore, Ed plans to construct a catamaran-style raft. He bundles 2 large clusters of logs with vines, then connects them horizontally. An old plank found in the jungle serves as the deck. By dusk, Ed finally completes his twin-hulled raft. Exhausted from the work, he soaks in a nearby pool, immediately feeling refreshed. Before full darkness falls, he checks the snare trap and surprisingly catches a rodent. The rat requires no preparation, just skewered on a stick and roasted by the fire. Ed finds the taste surprisingly good, consuming every bit, skin and bones included. The next morning, he still needs a spear before fishing. Ed somehow finds several sharp thorns and lashes them to a stick with bark fiber. Instant harpoon ready. During the maiden voyage, Ed remains uncertain about his creation. Fortunately, the raft doesn't immediately sink. Paddling to the lake's center, he raises his makeshift trident like Poseidon, but despite vigorous stabbing, comes up empty-handed. Realizing this method won't work, Ed collects more vines. Applying carpentry skills learned from Sum Jang the carpenter, he spends an entire day weaving a fish trap. Time flies. Suddenly, it's the challenge's final day. Ed uses a termite nest as bait, placing it inside the woven trap submerged in the lake. Soon, small fish swarm the trap, which Ed hopes will attract larger predators. The waiting proves agonizingly long. Only in late afternoon does a sizable fish approach. Spotting one entering the trap, Ed swiftly hauls it up, successfully capturing a large catfish. But cleaning the fish presents new challenges. Initially attempting to gut it with a thorn, the brittle spine snaps without piercing the tough skin. Ed even tries biting through, equally ineffective. Finally, he breaks off the catfish's own backbone and uses this bony weapon to slit the belly open. After removing the entrails, he gathers more guavas for dessert. The catfish roasts directly on the coals and end of in Ed's dreamed of jungle protein feast materializes just before the challenge ends. The omega-rich catfish meat rapidly replenishes his energy. Finishing the entire fish, he feels his mental clarity returning. Having mastered survival skills for this jungle, Ed chooses to burn his raft and fish trap before leaving, a symbolic return to nature, of what nature provided. Thus concludes this episode's challenge. Ed Stafford climbs up to a cliffside cave to collect birds' nests, munching on crispy chicken-flavored hermit crabs and savoring superb sea urchins, then prepares himself a pot of bird's nest soup with shark fin, turning what should be a wilderness survival challenge into what looks like a paid vacation. This episode, Ed Stafford takes on the challenge of an uninhabited beach on Coron Island in the Philippines. The production team spends $1 to charter an 80-year-old nuclear-powered speedboat. The captain races across the waves end of in 25. The beach is bordered by ocean on one side and cliffs on the other 3. Ed knows fresh water will be his biggest challenge. Fortunately, he finds 6 coconuts washed ashore. Surveying the beach, he sees countless plastic bottles and trash. While useful for survival, the sight depresses him environmentally. After sorting useful debris, Ed explores further and discovers 2 papaya trees and bamboo, ideal building materials and food sources. During this dry season, a shelter isn't strictly necessary, but Ed crafts a comfortable bed anyway. Springy green coconut fronds underneath, dry brown leaves on top, creating a surprisingly soft sleeping surface. After this work, he cracks open a coconut on rocks to rehydrate, already feeling the physical strain of mild dehydration. That night, sleep proves impossible. Haunted by trauma from his previous 60-day island survival, Ed remains psychologically unprepared for this challenge. By morning, he develops a low fever and knee infection, forcing him to use emergency antibiotics. He spends the day recovering, sustained only by coconut water. On day 3, slightly improved, Ed faces dwindling supplies. Only 3 coconuts remain. Attempting to extract moisture from papayas, he bites into an unripe one, crunchy soap flavor. The flesh tastes literally like detergent. While searching for water, Ed finds an old nail and devises an ingenious fire-starting method. Placing the nail tip down in a glass bottle, he gently shakes it to create microfractures along the base. Soon, the entire bottom detaches cleanly, creating a perfect magnifying lens. Focusing sunlight through this makeshift lens, Ed ignites tinder effortlessly. No bow drill required this time. With renewed morale, he forages the receding tide's rocky pools at dusk, hoping for king crabs, but settling for hermit crabs instead. Miraculously, he finds a Mongolian-origin tin can washed ashore, perfect for boiling his catch in seawater to replenish salts. His first proper meal, crunchy chicken-flavored salted hermit crabs. The successful fire and decent food finally break his psychological block. After proper rest, Ed seriously begins his Coron Island challenge. Finding fresh water becomes priority 1. At low tide, he explores opposite the beach, making an astonishing discovery. Through a narrow stone passage, after about 30 steps right, a hidden cliffside lagoon appears. Aerial views reveal this paradise-like sanctuary. Ed immediately spots valuable resources A large colony of edible sea urchins, peeling off spines and cracking them open, reveals the nutrient-rich golden gonads, packed with protein, vitamins, and fats. After sampling several, Ed notices mangrove swamps across the lagoon, with potentially freshwater sources in the hills beyond. If he were to find fresh water there, he'd first need to build transport equipment. Ed places bamboo over the fire to adjust its length, then arranges 3 poles into a triangular frame. The washed-up ropes on shore have become brittle, so he substitutes them with gathered vines. After securing the tripod frame, he layers fishing net across it. Using the sharp edge of the glass bottle base, he trims excess netting, then attaches plastic floats, completing his makeshift raft. Dog paddling across the lagoon, he reaches the mangrove swamp behind the crab lake. Scaling the small hill beyond, Ed searches desperately for water sources. Disappointingly, not only is there no visible fresh water, but even the soil feels parched and hard. Though he hasn't drunk water all day, Ed finds moisture through alternative means. Splitting open waterlogged wood in the swamp, he extracts wood-boring clams. Taste like oysters. Actually pretty good. Encouraged, he finds an even larger specimen and pops it straight into his mouth. Munching sounds. After this unconventional breakfast, Ed reconsiders his water strategy. The limestone cliffs catch his attention. Their numerous crevices likely trap rainwater. Choosing a climbable section, he expends considerable effort, reaching a fissure's upper reaches. This time, success. A natural rock basin holds precious rainwater. Recognizing the water contains leaves, debris, and bacteria, he carefully collects 5 liters in bottles. Without drinking directly, back on shore, Ed constructs a filter, cutting the bottom off a plastic bottle, covering the neck with cloth, layering sand, charcoal, then more sand inside. This simple system removes large particles, sand, and odors, colors, charcoal. After filtering, he boils the water over his fire, now safe for drinking. With survival basics secured, Ed shifts focus to improving food sources, transitioning from mere survival to comfortable living. Those collected bottles prove useful again. He cuts their tops off and inverts them into the bodies, creating simple fish traps. Ed produces 10 such traps, placing them in rocky pools frequented by small fish. Returning along the shore, he spots a blacktip reef shark cruising nearby, immediately plotting its capture. Back at camp, he fashions a double-barbed hook from bamboo. This design lies flat when swallowed, but embeds when pulled back. Using unidentified crustaceans as bait, Ed sets 6 lines along the shark's patrol route. He also repairs the torn fishing net found earlier, deploying it across the crab lake's entrance, creating overlapping fishing systems. That evening and night, Ed checks his traps twice, only to find them empty. Even by the challenge's final day, neither nets nor lines yield anything. Losing hope, Ed checks his bottle traps. The 10th one finally contains a tiny fish. Hardly worth the audience's time, he mutters disappointedly. Remembering locals harvest valuable swiftlet nests from these cliffs for sale, Ed investigates a cave above the beach and miraculously finds several edible nests. Practicing restraint, he collects just one for cooking. Cleaning his minuscule catch, Ed combines it with the bird's nest in his salvaged tin can, preparing an improvised gourmet soup. Behind his campsite, Ed Stafford discovers a tamarind tree. The leaves of this tree are beneficial for human digestion, so he adds a few to his cooking pot for flavor. After boiling for just 5 minutes, he can't wait to taste the results. The bird's nest hasn't fully dissolved yet, it still has a noodle-like texture, but the soup itself is incredibly flavorful. Enriched by both the fish and the bird's nest, Ed can actually feel the nutrients replenishing his body. This is undoubtedly the best meal he's had during this entire challenge. Just as he finishes eating, the captain arrives in the nuclear-powered speedboat, marking the successful conclusion of the challenge. The starvation expert, who went hungry for 3 days at the start, has finally caught a break. His fishing traps, which took 2.5 days to build, are now yielding consistent catches. His bird traps aren't far behind, providing him with a feast before the challenge even ends. Feeling ambitious, Ed even considers hunting a warthog, but instead, he luckily stumbles upon a tortoise. He roasts it thoroughly in a fire pit and enjoys its tender, juicy meat. This time, Ed Stafford ventures to Namibia, in southwestern Africa, a land of deserts and wildlife. It's the tail end of the dry season when he arrives. After being dropped off at the challenge site in the production team's tiger tank, Ed promptly strips off his shirt, leaving only his shorts, and sets off bareheaded into the wilderness. In desert survival, finding water is always the top priority. Ed straps on his pack and locates a dried-up riverbed. Following it upstream increases his chances of finding remaining water sources. Soon he observes both good and bad signs. Good. Fresh baboon droppings, proof that if baboons can survive here, so can he. Bad. The skeleton of a large antelope, likely killed by a leopard, a potential threat. As he walks, Ed keeps an eye out for useful resources. He spots a desert raisin bush, traditionally used by the Sand People as a fire drill. He takes a piece with him and continues upstream. After several hours, the riverbed narrows, and the vegetation thickens, a promising sign. Peering through the foliage, Ed spots a lake teeming with birds and animals, potential food sources. Surprisingly, instead of drinking directly from the lake, he digs a hole nearby, using the soil as a natural filter. After gulping down the bacteria-laden water, he turns his attention to shelter. He selects 2 trees, planning to sleep in one of them that night. Before dark, he needs to start a fire both for warmth and to deter predators. Thanks to the dry environment, fire-making materials are easy to find. Ed quickly assembles a hand drill and gets to work. Sparks appear almost immediately, and with a few gentle breaths, the tinder ignites. He builds a fire and encircles it with stones to prevent spreading. Next, he gathers thorny branches to create a protective barrier around his camp. That night, he sleeps in the tree, adding an extra layer of security. The next morning, Ed wakes up sore. Sleeping hunched over wasn't ideal. He decides to build a platform in a better-suited tree. Using 2 logs and the tree itself, he constructs a triangular frame, then lays wooden planks across it to create an elevated bed. Now it's time to set traps. But first, Ed needs a quick energy boost. He flips over rocks, collecting whatever insects he finds familiar or not, and pops them into his mouth. After his appetizer, he gathers fibrous plants for rope making. Back at camp, he pounds them with a bone to extract the fibers, then leaves them to dry in the sun. While waiting, Ed turns his attention to fishing. The lake is full of catfish, many swimming temptingly close to shore. He decides to use a natural cove near his camp, blocking off all but a narrow entrance with logs and rocks. Once fish swim in, they'll struggle to find their way out. With the trap set, Ed waits, hoping for a big catch. However, the task took longer than Ed Stafford had anticipated. After completing half of the construction, he gathered the sun-dried plant fibers and returned to camp to weave them into rope. In no time, he crafted a snare, now ready to set up a bird trap. First, he collected seeds that birds love to eat. Using a bent tree branch as a spring, he attached the snare to its tip. On the ground, he arranged small sticks in a circle, propping up the snare with a trigger stick hidden inside. Any bird pecking at the seeds would activate the trap, causing the snare to tighten and lift it into the air. By the time he finished, dusk was approaching. Relying on sheer endurance, Ed lasted until early morning on the 3rd day. Before the heat set in, he gathered plenty of stones to complete his fish trap. Now, any gaps wider than 2 fingers were sealed shut. To avoid scaring the fish away, Ed left the lakeside to check his bird trap and was surprised to find it already triggered, with a bird caught inside. Returning to the lake, he noticed catfish swimming near the entrance of his fish trap. Seizing the opportunity, he circled behind them and herded them toward the trap. After a while, he checked his catch. No giant catfish, but 2 tilapia instead. This marked a dream start to his challenge. Plucking the bird and gutting the fish, he roasted them over charcoal. That night, Ed enjoyed his first protein-rich feast since the challenge began. The tender, flaky fish meat was fragrant and juicy. With a full stomach, he slept soundly until morning. Now he set his sights on a warthog. If he could catch one, the bacon, chops, and belly alone would last him. Until the challenge ended, Ed wasted no time. Following the warthog's tracks, he searched for a good spot to set a trap. Along the way, he He caught the stench of rotting flesh. Tracking the smell, he found a long dead antelope. Noticing bite marks on the carcass, he set up a camera nearby, hoping to identify the scavenger and assess whether it posed a threat to him. Moving on, he scavenged an old boundary marker, salvaging some wire, perfect for crafting warthog snares. By then it was time to find food. His bird trap yielded nothing that day, but the fish trap delivered again, providing 2 more tilapia. Using the same cooking method, he enjoyed another meaty dinner. 2 nights of feasting left him overconfident. Fish alone no longer satisfied him. The next morning, he retrieved the camera from the antelope carcass. The footage revealed a lynx feeding at night. No threat to Ed. But the bigger discovery? A warthog had also visited the carcass. This gave him an idea. He surrounded the antelope with thorny branches, leaving only 3 entrances. At each, he set a wire snare, large enough for a lynx to pass through, but tight enough to strangle a warthog struggling to escape. Focused entirely on hunting warthogs that day, Ed forgot to check his fish trap during peak activity. That night, he went to bed hungry. The next morning, confident in his warthog trap, he even fashioned a stone axe, just in case he needed to finish off a trapped hog. But as they say, the higher the hopes, the harder the fall. Ed arrived to find his trap completely untouched. Dismissing it as bad luck, he set 2 more snares along the warthog's path, certain this would work. For the next 2 days, he obsessively checked the traps. Still nothing. Only when he saw the snares around the antelope carcass knocked over did he realize they were useless against warthogs. Worse yet, the lake's water level kept dropping due to drought, rendering his fish trap nearly ineffective. Now facing a full-blown food crisis, Ed reflected on his mistakes. Over-relying on the fish trap's success, he had poured all his energy into hunting warthogs, and now had neither. It was time to explore further afield. Day 9 of the challenge. Ed Stafford headed toward a nearby mountain. As soon as he broadened his perspective, his survival luck took a turn for the better. While resting at the summit, he noticed something moving on the ground. A tortoise. The local sand people consider tortoises a delicacy, and this unexpected protein source made Ed grin at the camera like a gleeful 70-year-old child. Without wasting time, he returned to camp, stoked the fire back to life, and quickly, yet humanely dispatched the tortoise. He didn't let the precious blood go to waste, drinking it and remarking on its pleasant taste, feeling an immediate boost in strength. For the tortoise itself, he opted for an earth oven. Burying it under hot embers and soil, he waited 3.5 hours before digging it up. By then, the shell cracked open easily, revealing firm, succulent meat. The first bite sent waves of rich aroma straight to his brain, tender, juicy, and packed with flavor. Ed nearly devoured the shell itself in his enthusiasm. Fully revitalized, he felt ready for anything. Time flew by. Before he knew it, the challenge was coming to an end. Before leaving, Ed used the tortoise shell as a makeshift pot. He found a shepherd's tree, dug up its roots with a bone tool, crushed them, and added them to the shell. Then, he dropped in a scorching hot stone from the fire, letting it boil the water. After 3 minutes, he had himself a steaming cup of wilderness Luckin coffee. Sipping it contentedly, he reflected on how a simple hot drink could lift both spirits and morale in survival situations. With his pack ready, he doused the fire, gave his campsite one last glance, and set off. Another successful challenge completed. Bonus: the Arctic Challenge. Originally, the crew thought dropping Ed into freezing wilderness would leave him starving 3 meals short of 9. But once again, he achieved protein freedom. He discovered a beach teeming with mussels, picked the largest ones, filled his fur hat with them, and roasted them thoroughly back at camp. Cracking one open revealed plump, golden meat. Each bite a tantalizing delight for the taste buds. Paired with crisp sea lettuce and giant geoducks as dessert, his meals were fit for royalty. Norway's Arctic wilderness. For this challenge, Ed Stafford was dropped in Nordland County, Norway, just 100 kilometers from the Arctic Circle, a true frozen wasteland. The production team insisted he go in completely alone, but to spare the editors the trouble of blurring him out, He reluctantly bundled up in full winter gear. As the chopper faded into the distance, Ed faced 10 days of solitary survival. Assessing his situation, he decided to descend toward the tree line. The snow varied from knee-deep to waist-deep, forcing him into a clumsy stumble. 3 steps forward, 1 fall down. To conserve energy, he switched to a butt-slide descent, letting gravity and his bladder do the work. Finally reaching the snow's edge, he arrived at the tree line, already feeling parched. Eating snow risked mouth ulcers and wasted calories melting it internally. Luckily, the ground was covered in moisture-rich moss. A squeeze yielded a quick drink. With thirst temporarily quenched, Ed focused on fire. Nightfall would bring temperatures as low as 20 degrees Celsius. He gathered vines for tinder and peeled bark from a silver birch tree. Its inner layer was highly flammable. His ideal tinder, dry grass, was nowhere to be found, soaked through by snow. As a last resort, he stuffed a handful into his pants, hoping body heat would dry it out. But for today, fire would remain a distant dream. Nightfall was approaching fast, and finding a suitable campsite became the top priority. As Ed Stafford made his way down the mountain, he spotted a relatively dry patch of ground and decided to settle there for the night. But just an hour after lying down, the cold became unbearable. He had to keep moving to stay warm, and as a result, he didn't sleep at all. At first light, he immediately set to work on his fire-making plan. While gathering materials, he noticed a small stream. Following it downstream led him to lower ground, where there was less snow and more dry wood. The stream emptied into a fjord, an open area with minimal snow. Ed set up camp above the fjord's waterline, freeing him to focus on fire. The grass he'd stashed in his pants the day before was now dry, but in such damp conditions, friction-based fire starting was unreliable. Instead, he found a red stone in the river, rich in iron oxide, and after a long search, he also scavenged a piece of metal and a dry chunk of fungus. With these, he could strike the metal against the stone to create sparks, catching them in the fungus to form an ember. Easier said than done. The sparks were tiny, and it took him the entire afternoon just to produce a single viable ember. Thankfully, the tinder and wood were dry enough that he quickly blew it into flames, building a roaring fire. In such extreme cold, a long fire stretching the length of his body would have been ideal for survival. But without proper tools to cut wood, and with the massive fuel demand of a long fire, he settled for a simple heart-shaped pit instead. With daylight fading fast, he didn't have time to finish his shelter. Instead, he propped up a tripod frame with a log, used stones as bedposts, laid planks across them as a platform, and topped it with branches for a makeshift mattress, keeping himself off the frozen ground. Then he spotted juniper berries on a nearby bush. Their blueberry-like taste marked his first real meal of the challenge. With the fire burning strong, Ed finally got a decent night's sleep. The next morning, he postponed further shelter work. His passive survival skills were running out, and it was time to hunt for food. No animal tracks were visible nearby. Hunger played tricks on his mind. For a moment, he even mistook water droplets under the ice for tadpoles. Pushing deeper into the woods, he finally found something edible, the only type of fern root native to the area. After gathering a pile, he sampled one. Its licorice-like flavor wasn't bad. With plenty available, he could stock up on carbs. Returning to camp, he was met with a shock. During his absence, a spring tide had surged into the fjord. The narrow stream was now a wide river. Luckily, his high-ground campsite was spared, but a new crisis emerged. His fire was dwindling. Upon inspection, he realized the soggy ground beneath it was sapping its heat. He relocated the fire, scraped away the waterlogged moss, and exposed the rocky layer below. Soon, the flames roared back to life. Next, he gathered armfuls of wood, leaning them against the tripod frame, and covering them with the removed moss as a makeshift roof. His shelter, neither windproof nor waterproof, was now complete. But the moment he stepped back, the crossbeam sagged under the weight. He hastily added a supporting log to reinforce it. With shelter, fire, and water secured, only food remained a challenge. Or so he thought. The next morning, disaster struck. The overburdened crossbeam snapped, nearly burying him in the collapse. Worse, sleet began falling. But if there's one thing about Ed Stafford, it's that the greater the crisis, the sharper he performs. With calm determination, Ed Stafford removed the collapsed wood and moss. He selected a sturdy log as the new crossbeam and repeated the previous day's process, stacking wood against the beam and covering it with moss for roofing. This time, the structure held firm. On the 5th day of survival, Ed searched the fjord shoreline for food. Lifting a rock, he discovered tiny crustaceans hiding beneath. Barely a mouthful, but protein nonetheless. Without hesitation, he popped them into his mouth. Continuing his search, he collected several snails and 2 geoducks. After roasting them over the fire for 10 minutes, a seafood feast was ready. First, he tasted the geoduck, crisp texture with a chicken-like flavor, packing more protein per bite than beef. Next, he cracked open the snails one by one, savoring each morsel before enjoying a well-earned rest. At dawn, his fire was dying again, this time from rain-dampened wood. Admitting defeat with his experimental fire pit design, he scavenged the forest for massive logs. Using 2 flat rocks as supports, he built a hollow, elongated fire pit. Tended carefully, it soon blazed fiercely, so intensely that it accidentally ignited part of his shelter. Fortunately, the damp materials prevented spreading flames. A week into the challenge, though surviving adequately, Ed pushed further in search of better provisions. At a coastal fjord, he anticipated abundant shellfish, only to stagger at the sight. The entire beach teemed with plump mussels. Transforming into a harvesting machine, he filled his fur hat to the brim. Bonus finds included sea lettuce and edible kelp. Back at camp, he grilled the seaweed first, using birch bark as a plate. The tart, crunchy sea lettuce made a perfect appetizer. Soon the mussels cooked through, their golden meat glistening invitingly. The first bite delivered unparalleled tenderness, prompting Ed to declare he could live here indefinitely. Post-feast, he lined his bed with fire-dried moss. Sinking into its cushioning embrace, he melted into the most comfortable sleep of the expedition. On extraction day, Ed prepared a signal fire, twisting dried grass into bundles. Wrapped in birch bark, he created slow-burning smoke torches. At the fjord's edge, he built a platformed pyre with spruce boughs. The billowing smoke column quickly guided the crew's boat ashore. Another successful challenge concluded. While other survival experts are still chewing tree bark and roots, Ed Stafford is already enjoying tender eggs. After swallowing 2 of these dark cuisine delicacies, he's immediately overwhelmed by the taste. Not stopping there, he heads straight to the marshlands to probe crab holes with his hands. Though the pinches are painful, the haul proves well worth it. Come evening, he feasts on charcoal-grilled snake meat as thick as his arm. To cut through the grease, he rounds out the meal with wild fruits, a perfect balance of protein and vitamins. New challenge, Madagascar survival. As a renowned survival expert, Ed Stafford embarks on a fresh challenge, this time on Africa's Madagascar island. The journey begins with a ride in the production team's vehicle, speeding dramatically to the drop-off point, then transferring to a local's luxury yacht. With the boatman's farewell, Ed begins his challenge at the starting point. Given the region's scorching, arid climate and high risk of heat stroke, his top priority is finding fresh water immediately. Standing alone at the launch point, Ed's famously bald head gleaming in the sun, he prepares for his starvation journey with confidence. The mission: reach a village 40 kilometers away. His gear remains his classic survival trio, plus a drone for aerial footage. Drawing on experience, Ed quickly orients toward the village and begins trekking with his backpack. The muddy terrain proves treacherous and arcane. Each step sinks deep, exhausting him within minutes. The calorie expenditure is immense, forcing him to crawl on all fours at times. Just as he clears the worst mud, a river blocks his path. Knowing local wildlife can be aggressive, wading through risks deadly encounters, he opts to detour instead. Then he notices the rising tide, His face immediately clouds with concern. Progress today seems impossible. Retracing his steps to a smaller channel, he finds waist-deep water already. Picking up speed, Ed grows increasingly anxious as the tide surges faster than he can move. After an exhausting struggle, a sandbar emerges ahead, its dry appearance promising safety. Sure enough, it feels solid underfoot, bringing a relieved smile, until rising seawater completely surrounds it minutes later. Even Ed's confidence wavers now. Day 2. Fortunately, his high campsite spared him from the tide overnight. With the water receded, Ed resumes his journey. As temperatures soar, after 2.5 hours under the brutal sun, dehydration sets in, dry mouth, dizziness, early heat exhaustion symptoms. 3 hours later, he finally escapes the marsh. Suddenly, a bird bursts from nearby shrubs. Investigating the nest, Ed discovers eggs, but upon cracking one open, finds a partially developed embryo, veiny and red with forming limbs. Despite years of eating unconventional snacks on camera, this makes even Ed's scalp crawl. Yet with 6 missed meals over 2 days, he steels himself and swallows it whole. Surprisingly, hunger makes it taste acceptable. He eagerly downs a second egg, only to gag at the horrific flavor. After replenishing some calories, Ed Stafford continued trekking under the scorching Sunday. Soon, he entered a grove of baobab trees, a species endemic to the region, reputed to live for thousands of years. Whether that's true or not, Ed had no mind to ponder now. He knew one thing clearly. Without finding water soon, he wouldn't survive the day. Seeking shade under a tree, he paused to rest. Apart from those 2 bird eggs earlier, he'd consumed nothing liquid all day. Exhaustion and thirst overwhelmed him. Lightheaded, vision blurring, even his thinking grew sluggish. Just as he considered calling for evacuation, a vine nearby caught his attention. Experience told him its underground roots likely stored fresh water. Action followed thought immediately. Grabbing a stick, he began digging fervently. 30 minutes later, success. A plump, pale root emerged. Pulling it out revealed impressive length and girth, bringing a broad smile to his face. He bit into it hungrily. Crisp, juicy chunks, with a subtle coconut flavor. This single root contained at least a bottle's worth of water, plus ample carbohydrates. Several satisfying bites later, he carefully reburied the remaining root to regrow. Day 3. Having detoured to avoid mangrove swamps, Ed found himself significantly off course. Breakfast came from baobab fruits overhead. Too tall to reach, he scavenged the ground instead, soon finding a freshly fallen specimen. Splitting it open revealed plump flesh. First taste, fermented malt-like flavor, packed with vitamins surpassing beef, and rich in essential minerals. Never one to waste resources, Ed stuffed 2 fruits into his pack for later. Water remained the pressing priority. Reaching a dry riverbed, he noticed slightly damp soil, audibly crunchy underfoot. More digging ensued. Before long, fresh water seeped through. Parched Ed drank greedily, his bald head gleaming with renewed vitality. To transport this hard-won water, he hollowed out a baobab fruit, filling it with water to create a nutrient-rich soup for future hydration. Revitalized, he marched onward, then froze at an unexpected sight. An unlucky serpent crossing his path. Starving Ed showed no mercy. A few precise strikes with his staff, and the snake became portable protein, tucked securely in his pocket. As dusk approached, he settled beneath a massive tree and resumed his signature survival cooking. Anticipating charcoal-grilled snake, he worked enthusiastically. The arid environment helped flames rise quickly. After burying the snake in an earthen oven beneath the fire, he waited patiently. Ironically, just as his meal neared readiness, thunder rumbled across the typically rainless region. Yet against the odds, his snake emerged perfectly cooked, his first proper protein in days. Devouring it ravenously on the ground, Ed found it infinitely superior to the bird eggs. Tender texture, spicy and aromatic, utterly irresistible. Satiated and content, he slept soundly under the stormy skies. Day 5. The 5th day arrived. Ed Stafford set out without breakfast. After a morning of trekking, his route finally corrected course. His remaining water supply dwindled, leaving Ed visibly concerned. But worse awaited. Another mangrove swamp blocked his path. After prolonged deliberation, Ed once again chose to detour. By noon, temperatures soared to a brutal 40 degrees Celsius. Just as exhaustion neared its limit, a wild waterhole appeared unexpectedly. Without hesitation, Ed pressed his bald head forward to test the water. Confirming it fresh, his face lit up with relief. He drank until comfortably full. Rehydrated, Ed's scalp regained its characteristic shine. Deciding to camp nearby, he set down his pack and ventured into the mangroves for food. Immediately, he began probing holes with a stick, then switched to bare-handed excavation. His efforts yielded a large blue crab. Encouraged, he repeated the process until a crab's painful pinch taught him respect. Despite the pain, the bountiful catch justified the struggle. Back at camp, Ed feasted contentedly. The plump crab claws burst with protein, each bite a nutritional triumph. Day 6. At dawn, instinct suggested the village neared. To verify, Ed climbed a hill for vantage. The ascent proved treacherous. Shifting sands caused constant backsliding. Through agile maneuvering, he finally summited, only to find nothing. Exhausted, he pressed onward. Hours later, fatigue forced him to make camp. He collapsed into immediate sleep. Final day. Revitalized at dawn, Ed resumed his journey. After 2.5 hours, numerous hoofprints signaled civilization's proximity. Summoning final strength, he crested one last dune, the long-awaited village finally visible. With joyful relief, he boarded a boat homeward. The challenge concluded successfully. New challenge: Rhodope Mountains. Ed's jungle feasts had featured astonishing variety, transforming survival into near vacation. His final charcoal-grilled snail meal, however, produced pure culinary agony. Now in Bulgaria's wild Rhodope Mountains, renowned for abundant wildlife, including wolves and brown bears, skeptical Ed prepared to test local fauna. Selecting a prime mountain location, he confidently began his starvation challenge, equipped solely with emergency items. The objective: reach a reservoir 30 kilometers away. Using solar navigation, he established direction promptly. Hoping to maximize progress while energized, his plans faltered immediately. A near-fatal slip on treacherous slopes forced cautious reassessment. Choosing detours over risks, he pressed forward determinedly. Upon reaching a vantage point, he discovered his path blocked by mountains, requiring hours of additional circumnavigation. Mid-journey, fresh brown bear scat appeared abruptly. The discovery unsettled him deeply. With nightfall approaching, and no secure campsite available, in this predator-rich environment, fortune provided a cave. Approaching cautiously, he discovered bones at the entrance, heightening unease. Finding the cave otherwise vacant, he steeled himself to shelter there overnight. Nighttime restlessness. Exhausted, Ed Stafford fell asleep early that night. Yet within hours, he sensed something moving near his camp. Sleep became impossible. Another sleepless night awaited. Day 2. Recalling the previous night's ordeal, Ed grabbed his pack and hurried away without looking back. Hours later, a near-vertical cliff across the river halted his progress. Faced with an impassable route, he detoured once more. After grueling hours of trekking, he finally reached a second ridge, only to confront yet another mountain. Undeterred, Ed chose to follow the ridgeline, avoiding the valley below. Several kilometers later, as the ridgeline neared its end, 6 missed meals over 2 days left him weakened. He selected an ideal spot to make camp. For simplicity, he constructed a lean-to shelter. After framing the structure, he layered bark for roofing. The finished shelter fit perfectly. Aside from being open on 3 sides, it served its purpose well. That night, cold and hungry, Ed resolved to find food the next day. Day 3. At dawn, Ed set out foraging. Almost immediately, he discovered dense patches of clover. Without hesitation, he grabbed handfuls and ate them raw. Pleasantly fragrant, the taste encouraged him to sample nearby leaves too. Further searching revealed wild mushrooms. Unwashed, he consumed some immediately and stored the rest in bark wrappings. En route to camp, he spotted a horse hoof fungus, perfect tinder material. Back at camp, after drying the fungus, he searched the creek for fire-starting stones. The spotted pyrite stones he found, rich in metallic content, proved ideal for spark creation. Returning with the stones, he encountered a wild horse carcass, too decomposed for consumption. Resourceful as ever, he collected mane hairs for potential fishing line. Curiosity prompted him to set up a trail camera before leaving the site. At camp, hours of stone striking finally produced sparks. Nestled in prepared dry grass, flames emerged triumphantly. His first act? Roasting the mushrooms. Within minutes, aroma filled the camp. Ravenous, Ed devoured them eagerly, the crisp, fresh flavor satisfying temporarily. He then hollowed the horsehoof fungus. He preserved embers overnight. Day 4. At daybreak, Ed checked the trail camera footage. The revealed footage stunned him. A bear had passed terrifyingly close, mere hundreds of meters from his camp. Panicked, his non-existent hair nearly stood on end. Grabbing his pack, he fled immediately, shouting loudly to deter potential pursuit. Reaching a stream, he recognized it as nature's highway and followed it to expedite travel. Spotting numerous edible snails along the banks, he soon gathered an ample handful. Considering potential toxins, worried about possible toxins in their bodies, eating them raw risked poisoning, so he gathered strawberry leaves to help detoxify them, hoping for strawberry-flavored snails later. Progress and challenges. As Ed Stafford pressed onward, good news emerged. The destination grew nearer. Bad news followed. The stream changed direction. With night approaching, and campsite concerns mounting, a cave appeared fortuitously. Haunted by prior experiences, he shouted into the cave first. Confirming it empty, he still cautiously lit a campfire for security. Fishing venture. Transforming into an angler, Ed crafted bone fragments into hooks and horsehair into fishing lines, producing 4 complete sets. Baiting them with earthworms, he cast them into the water for overnight soaking. Exhausted, he retired early beneath the stars. Day 5. At dawn, Ed checked his lines. One held a small but precious fish, packed with protein and fat. This premium ingredient required no seasoning, not even gutting. Soon, a protein-rich meal sizzled ready. The renowned survival expert, having endured 11 missed meals in 4 days, finally enjoyed his second proper feast, devouring fish bones and all voraciously. Relentless journey. Revitalized after breakfast, he shouldered his pack and departed. Risking direct routes to save time, he traversed punishing terrain all day. Forced to camp at nightfall, dinner became the previously gathered snails. While roasting them, he prepared tomorrow's breakfast, constructing a mousetrap, baited with snail meat. Unpleasant dining. Inspecting the cooked snails revealed unappetizing gooey contents. Yet calorie needs prevailed. He swallowed them whole. The revolting aftertaste lingered stubbornly. Day 7. Waking unharmed by snail toxins, he found the trap triggered, containing 1 plump rodent. Properly roasted, this promised far better eating than the cursed snails. Final push. After this meager meal, Ed launched his ultimate sprint. 5 arduous hours later, doubt about directions arose, until water glimmered through trees. The destination at last. 7 days after starting, Ed successfully reunited with his driver, concluding this challenge triumphantly. New challenge. Atacama Desert. Ed Stafford's desert survival featured surprisingly luxurious grilled pufferfish. As with all premium ingredients, minimal preparation sufficed, consumed raw as sashimi, with evident satisfaction. Bolivia's eastern Atacama Desert combines high altitude with extreme aridity and heat. Its barren plateaus rivaled Ed's own hairless scalp. Dropped by production team helicopter, the driver politely abandoned Ed before departing unceremoniously. This mission reached salt flats 50 kilometers distant. Navigation and initial struggles. Using the sun's east-west trajectory as reference, Ed Stafford quickly determined his bearing. Shouldering his pack, he began the arduous trek. Unaccustomed to high-altitude conditions, exhaustion struck within steps. As temperatures climbed steadily, securing water became imperative. Canyon descent. Ahead lay a canyon. Normally, Ed would detour without hesitation, but potential water sources below compelled him to descend. After an hour traversing the valley, thirst and fatigue overwhelmed him. Drenched in cold sweat, heat stroke seemed imminent. Forced to rest in shade temporarily, he resumed travel once temperatures eased. Water discovery. Soon, damp soil and lush vegetation signaled nearby water. True enough, the sound of rushing water soon reached his ears. A substantial wild river emerged, prompting immediate, reckless drinking. Sudden storm. No sooner had he drunk than thunder cracked overhead. A rare downpour commenced. Shelter became urgent. Fortune favored the bald. A perfectly sized rock crevice appeared. He barely entered before torrents fell outside. Declaring this his campsite, Ed cleared loose stones hastily. Too weary to await nightfall, he collapsed into sleep instantly. Day 2. Awakening refreshed, Ed ventured out seeking resources. His findings included a flattened but functional antique tin can, the region's sole tree, yielding a fire drill branch. Returning to camp, he fashioned a hand drill using shoelaces as bowstrings. Fire struggle. High altitude's thin oxygen initially thwarted ignition attempts. 4 relentless hours of friction finally produced precious sparks. Gentle breaths nurtured the fledgling flame. This 5-hour ordeal, compounding 5 missed meals over 2 days, left him too drained to continue. Day 3. Morning frost confirmed sub-zero overnight temperatures. To preserve his hard-won fire, Ed harvested resin-rich plants, ideal tinder when dried over flames. He packed smoldering samples in the tin can. Macabre discoveries. En route, a riverside carcass caught his eye. Closer inspection revealed a decomposing llama corpse, far too rancid for consumption, but its leg tendons proved valuable for fishing line. Later, a plastic bottle appeared, containing 2 desiccated mice. Though unsightly, this became a crucial water container. After thorough cleaning, the desert's harsh lessons continued. After an uncertain amount of time, the river suddenly grew rapid. Since his destination lay on the opposite bank, crossing such swift currents was impossible. After 2.5 minutes of deliberation, he chose to detour around the river. Several kilometers later, the terrain offered no footholds below, let alone a way across the raging water. To make matters worse, the landscape ahead grew increasingly steep. With no alternative routes, he had no choice but to press forward. A brutal challenge after 3 days without food. His only hope was to escape this canyon soon. After several more kilometers, he finally found a gentle slope to cross the river. This trek left Ed Stafford utterly exhausted. Deciding to travel no further today, he immediately sought shelter in a nearby cave. Retrieving his preserved embers, he built a campfire. As night fell, thoughts of protein consumed him. With no other options, he went to bed hungry once more. Day 4. Morning brought existential doubts. Normally, by this point, he'd have enjoyed hearty meals. Instead, 3 days had passed with 9 missed meals. Prolonged starvation began eroding his mental state. He vented his frustrations to the camera. At one point, the usually resilient Ed Stafford broke down in tears. Proof even survival experts crack under such extremes. But quitting wasn't an option. Regaining composure, he collected llama tendons, soaking them in his tin can to soften. Separating the fibers, he braided them into fishing line. For hooks, he repurposed barbed wire found earlier. At the riverbank, he secured the line to a stick planted in the ground, baiting it with rotting llama flesh. Passive waiting wasn't his style. To improve odds, he constructed a stone fish trap along the shore. With traps set, he scavenged bushes for snacks. After thorough searching, one unlucky lizard met its fate. Without ceremony, a stone delivered instant death. Too famished for proper preparation, he consumed it raw, the crunchy texture providing momentary satisfaction. Returning to camp, he retrieved the dead mice from his bottle, then rinsed the container at the river. Checking his fishing lines revealed no catches, until he spotted movement in the stone trap. A small pufferfish became his prize. After days of starvation, proper protein at last, adrenaline surging, he swiftly cleaned it with a stone blade and tossed it into the flames. As fat sizzled, his expression spoke volumes. The cooked fish delivered far superior flavor to lizard sashimi. Tender, rich, outclassing beef in protein content. He devoured every morsel, bones included. Day 5. Fortified by his meal, he left the river, aiming straight for his destination. The steep canyon walls left him gasping for breath. Upon finally scaling them, he verified his bearings and continued. Yet another canyon soon blocked his path, triggering furious cursing. Facing a potential 2.5-day detour, Ed Stafford chose defiance this time. With tremendous effort, he conquered the obstacle, only to encounter yet another canyon, earning more profanity. Grumbling continuously, he pressed forward until emerging exhausted. Spotting another river ahead, he rushed to drink, only to spit it out angrily. Salt water. Defeated, he trudged onward with bitter disappointment. Ed Stafford marched relentlessly from day into night before collapsing onto the first open patch of ground. At dawn, his water bottle neared emptiness. Facing this crisis, he prioritized maintaining composure. Mental stability proved most crucial. 7 relentless hiking hours later, he scaled a mountain to survey the terrain. The summit revealed no trace of his destination. Exhaustion weighed heavily as his water supply fully depleted. Dehydration brought unbearable thirst. No survival tricks remained, just sheer physical endurance and stubborn willpower. 3 scorching hours later, another summit revealed a vast salt flat, undoubtedly the extraction point. Pushed beyond physiological limits, Ed Stafford spotted the approaching vehicle. This 8-day challenge concluded, with ravenous consumption of provided supplies. New expedition, Laos's Pho Liang Mountains. Ed Stafford's jungle feasts bordered on extravagant, charred millipedes with crispy exteriors and tender interiors, delivered protein levels dwarfing beef. True to form, he balanced meat with foraged greens. For nutritional variety, one reckless mushroom snack nearly ended his survival career prematurely. As the bald yet brilliant starvation specialist, Ed now targeted Laos's mine-laden Pho Liang Range, a hazardous choice motivated solely by budget constraints. The challenge begins. After vehicular insertion, his mission: trek 30 km to a remote village. Standard protocol applied. Only filming gear and emergency items packed. No food, water, or even hair products. Solar navigation quickly established direction. Immediate obstacles arose. Sheer cliffs demanded dangerous climbing gear he lacked, forcing instant detours. 4 sweltering hours later, a wild river appeared miraculously. Initial dysentery concerns vanished as he drank greedily, revitalizing instantly. Surveying revealed rafting downstream as the optimal route, until gathering storms postponed construction. A serendipitous cave discovery provided perfect shelter as torrential rains commenced outside. Day 2. Raft building. Morning brought intensive raft construction. Deadwood lashed with vine ropes formed a serviceable vessel. Launch excitement turned to alarm as the raft sank partially, yet remained marginally functional. After 2.5 minutes deliberation, Ed proceeded downstream. Despite instability, this method proved exponentially faster than jungle trekking. After drifting for an uncertain amount of time, the mountains ahead remained as steep as ever. Constant paddling drained his energy. Even with his passive starvation endurance, 5 missed meals in 2 days left Ed Stafford struggling. Pushing forward, he spotted a fig tree on the riverbank. The sight of ripe fruit made his mouth water. Desperate, he grabbed a bamboo pole and jabbed at the branches wildly. Splitting open a fallen fig, he found its flesh plump and sweet. A rare smile broke across his face as he savored it. Several figs later, he declared them utterly satisfying. Reinvigorated, he resumed poking the tree, managing to half fill his stomach. Then the wind howled across the water, temperatures plummeting. Clearly no conditions for further travel. Ed Stafford decided to camp here for the night. Securing the raft, he scouted for shelter. A hollowed-out tree trunk proved perfect. Windproof, rainproof, an absolute win. With shelter secured, he turned to fire-making. Gone was the man who once cried over failed attempts. Now, flames leapt obediently from his friction drill. The fire's success only sharpened his hunger. Time for protein. The survival buffet begins. First course, an unlucky grasshopper. It nearly escaped, before being recaptured and crunched alive. Crispy, satisfying. Next, a doomed butterfly met the same fate. Ed Stafford chewed contentedly. Finally, a passing millipede fell victim. Though tempted, he exercised restraint, tossing it into the flames instead. The sizzling arthropod emerged, charred and crackling. One bite confirmed its deliciousness. These calories could fuel him for days. Day 3. Morning brought more drifting, until a mountain pass appeared. The current threatened to sweep him past. Frantic paddling barely secured a landing. Ashore, the sheer valley walls dismayed him. Fearing mid-climb exhaustion, he postponed the ascent until dawn, sleeping on damp ground. Day 4. Bamboo canteens filled, he began the grueling climb. Within minutes, he gasped for breath between curses. Then, a misstep, a yelp, followed by furious swearing. Silence. There, half buried, an active landmine. One slight deviation in his fall could have meant disaster. Shaken but unharmed, he pressed upward. An hour later, exhaustion and hunger resurfaced. His bamboo canteen ran dry. Endless trudging later, the terrain leveled, only to reveal endless mountains ahead. Ed Stafford's expression darkened, but he marched on. But the immediate priority was finding fresh water while avoiding landmines. Just as he neared his limit, a sudden grin broke across his face. A stream ahead. Without hesitation, he dropped to the ground and drank greedily, even splashing water over his bald head to cool down. To his surprise, the area wasn't just rich in water. Food was abundant too. He picked up some unknown object, cracked it open, and ate it without a second thought. Next, a cluster of yellowish-brown mushrooms, gobbled down before he could even inspect them. The taste? Surprisingly good. Then, an unidentified fruit. No time to check for poison. He'd find out by eating it. Still munching contentedly, he moved on to Palm Heart. By nightfall, he was thoroughly stuffed. Day 5. At dawn, Ed Stafford followed the stream. 2.5 days later, another mountain blocked his path. Frustration set in. But worse, the stream vanished into a pitch-black cave. Venturing inside seemed suicidal. Detouring through the jungle, risk stepping on a mine, no good options. Finally, he decided to craft a torch. Nearby, he found a Dipterocarpus tree, perfect for torch making. He cut into the bark, collecting the resin that oozed out. Heat kept it from hardening. By morning, he'd have enough resin for a long-burning torch. As night fell, he muttered complaints to the camera before sleeping. Day 8. At dawn, he checked the tree. A generous pool of resin had formed. He scooped it into bamboo containers, mixed it with wood shavings, and wrapped the paste in leaves. The result? A torch that could burn for at least 30 minutes. With it, he ventured into the cave. Even with the torch, visibility barely extended a few meters. The air grew damp as he advanced. Then, disaster. The torch sputtered out. Now relying on his camera's dim light, he pressed forward. Just as despair crept in, a glimmer ahead, Ed Stafford's face lit up. Following the light, he emerged from the cave and spotted a small house in the distance. After 8 grueling days, he had finally returned to civilization. The challenge was complete. New challenge, Thailand's Golden Triangle. New challenge, the frigid wilderness. After enduring days of hunger in previous adventures, Ed Stafford now found himself in an extreme cold environment. This time, fortune smiled upon him. He stumbled upon an entire wild goat carcass. Back at camp, he indulged in making smoked jerky from the meat. To top it off, he also caught a massive black rat, effortlessly breaking his cycle of starvation. Following his successful survival in Mongolia's desert, this time, Ed Stafford ventured into the Altai Mountains within the same country. Winter temperatures here could plummet to 20 degrees Celsius, a stark contrast to the scorching desert. After being dropped off at the starting point, his mission was clear: trek 50 km across the mountains, then another 50 km to reach nomadic settlements. But the brutal 80 km/h winds made every step a struggle. With the barren landscape offering no shelter, his biggest concern was finding a place to camp for the night. Soon, a frozen lake blocked his path. Across it lay dense forests, an ideal spot for shelter and food, judging by his experience. Tempted, he decided to cross the ice. At first, it seemed stable, but after a few steps, the ice cracked beneath him. Panicked, he immediately retreated. Falling in would mean certain death within minutes. Forced to detour along the shore, his luck soon changed. At the foot of a mountain, he spotted what appeared to be an abandoned cabin. If he could scavenge supplies here, completing the challenge would be a breeze. Upon arrival, he knocked and called out, "Hello?" No response. His hopes of a free meal vanished. Undeterred, he searched the area and found 2 rusty tin cans and a sheepskin to use as a pillow. With no time to waste, he pressed on. Hours later, as the sun began to set, panic set in. He still had no shelter for the night. In desperation, he settled for a bush as makeshift cover. That night, the temperature plummeted, leaving him shivering uncontrollably. He nearly considered quitting. The next morning, after a quick warm-up, he set off without breakfast. Spotting a small stream, he drank until half full. Not far ahead, a large black rat scurried into a burrow. Seeing this protein-packed opportunity, Ed Stafford devised a plan. Flooding the burrow. Using the tin cans, he scooped water from the stream and poured it into the hole. Soon, the rat bolted out, only to be swiftly caught by his quick reflexes. With his meal secured, he stuffed it into his pocket and continued. After an arduous trek, he finally reached the mountain's base and chose a valley to set up camp. His top priority now was fire. After gathering dry grass and resin-rich branches, he surprised even himself. Instead of friction fire, he pulled out a battery from his pack. The damp conditions forced this unconventional method. By connecting wires to the battery's terminals and touching them to the tinder, flames erupted within moments, far more efficient than rubbing sticks. Next, he butchered the rat, tossed it into the tin can, and boiled it over the fire. While the meat cooked, he built a simple lean-to shelter, topping it with branches. Even if snow fell, this sturdy structure would hold up. After a flurry of activity, the roasted rat was finally ready. True to form as one of Ed Stafford's favorite foods, his beaming face and ravenous chewing said it all. In no time, he devoured every last morsel. Day 3. Ed Stafford shouldered his pack and set off early again. After hours of relentless trekking, another frozen lake appeared before him. Haunted by his previous close call, his expression darkened with worry. But given the high altitude, he made the rare decision not to detour. Time was of the essence. Heart-pounding, he finally reached the opposite shore, only to face a sheer cliff that nearly claimed his life. Realizing the route was too dangerous, he reluctantly turned back, to find a safer path. Then, circling crows caught his attention. Years of survival experience told him there must be carrion nearby. Sure enough, just ahead lay the corpse of a wild goat, mostly picked clean by scavengers. Despite the putrid stench, Ed Stafford stubbornly extracted a piece of offal. The smell was foul, but the meat showed no obvious signs of rot. With some processing, it might still be edible. After 2.5 minutes of deliberation, he changed plans. Haul the goat back to last night's camp, refuel, then continue. Back at camp, he skinned the goat with stones and eagerly roasted some meat for an immediate feast. The rest he sliced into strips and hung over a rack to smoke into jerky. The task consumed the entire day. The next morning, sleet fell as mist shrouded the mountain peaks. Venturing out in such weather would be suicidal. Resigned, Ed Stafford gnawed on roasted goat leg in camp. Between bites, he foraged for wild garlic, because meat without garlic is only half as delicious. One mouthful later, a blissful grin spread across his face. By afternoon, the weather still hadn't improved. Boredom set in as he loitered around camp. Day 5. Finally clear skies. Ed Stafford packed up with renewed vigor. His smoked goat jerky weighed nearly 1 kilogram, enough to last days without hunting. With supplies secured, he marched out confidently. The protein boost supercharged his progress, until a misstep sent him tumbling downslope, howling in pain. Worse than the rocky terrain was the backtracking required to retrieve his camera. At the summit, his heart sank. Endless snowy ridges stretched ahead. Deep snow drastically slowed his pace. At times, he simply slid downhill on his backside. Hours of trudging through powder left his muscles screaming. At one point, He collapsed and wriggled forward like a worm. To make matters worse, snow glare seared his eyes. Frustrated, he resolved to camp overnight and resume at dawn when the snow hardened. With practiced motions, he carved out a snow cave, a one-bedroom suite to avoid freezing solid. Lining it with the goat skin, he couldn't help but smirk at this unexpected luxury. As darkness fell, he vented to the camera, before turning in early. The next morning, Ed Stafford crawled out of his snow cave at dawn. As expected, the hardened snow made trekking much easier. But before long, the rising sun softened the snow again, plunging him back into yesterday's nightmare. Waist-deep powder made forward progress impossible. Forced to worm his way forward once more, he spent 2.5 hours, crawling like a snail through the snow. At this pace, he'd freeze to death long before reaching his destination. To make matters worse, his goat jerky rations were gone. Food was virtually non-existent here. Even the unshakable Ed Stafford felt a pang of despair. After careful consideration, he reluctantly pulled out his satellite phone. Dragging his pack toward the extraction point, he admitted defeat. The first time in his survival career, nature had bested him. When the rescue team arrived, a physically and mentally exhausted Ed Stafford climbed into their vehicle. This challenge ended in failure. New challenge, the Darien Gap. As the saying goes, Ed Stafford starts every adventure starving for days. But this time, his meals were passable. When thirsty, he sipped his signature, all-natural boba tea, muddy water with floating debris. When hungry, he munched on his favorite cucumber-flavored jungle fruit. He even caught 2 juvenile crucian carp and simmered them with wild bananas into a nourishing stew, turning survival into a gourmet experience. As the only bushcrafter, with a gleaming bald head, Ed Stafford now faced Panama's Darien Gap. Bordering Colombia, this swampy rainforest harbors armed gorillas, venomous snakes, and scorpions, making it as dangerous as it looks. Unfazed, Ed Stafford arrived by speedboat. From the moment he stepped ashore, an uneasy tension gripped him. Watching the boat disappear, he faced his mission: reach a village 30 kilometers away in 10 days. His gear remained the classic trio: machete, fire starter, and camera. This time, he brought a drone to avoid backtracking for footage. Using the sun's position and stick shadows, he quickly plotted his course. Before setting off, he scavenged the beach, scoring 2 perfect fire logs and a rusty metal shard. With some sharpening, it became his prized tetanus blade. Spotting a river aligned with his route, he decided to follow its banks. This allowed constant navigation checks and instant water access. Hours into the jungle, flat terrain gave way to steep slopes. As dusk fell, exhaustion forced him to camp riverside. He scraped together a leaf bed and collapsed into uneasy sleep. Day 2. After gulping down river water, he marched onward empty, stomached. A 7-meter waterfall blocked his path. The slippery rock face was too risky, so he detoured inland, only to lose the river's sound completely. The higher he climbed, the weaker he grew. Dehydration and hunger gnawed at him. Finally reaching a summit, he ignored the breathtaking view. His parched throat cared only about finding water. Descending blindly, he suddenly spotted unfamiliar fruits dangling from a tree. Desperation overrode caution. He bit into one. Crunch. To his surprise, the crisp flesh tasted remarkably like cucumber. Gorging on several, he replenished both fluids and calories. Refreshed, Ed Stafford continued his march with renewed vigor. After another 2.5 hours of arduous trekking, Ed Stafford finally reached the foot of the mountain, only to be greeted by a dried-up riverbed. The sight left him visibly frustrated, but drawing from years of survival experience, he knew the vines growing along the riverbed might still contain some moisture. Without hesitation, he pulled out his tetanus blade and began hacking at the vines. Perhaps due to the dry season, they were completely parched. Not a single drop of water emerged. Defeated, he reluctantly continued his search for water. Just as dehydration threatened to overwhelm him, he stumbled upon a stagnant puddle. Judging by its appearance, it likely contained half the periodic table of elements. His parched throat battled his common sense, but ultimately, discipline prevailed. He dug a hole beside it for basic filtration. As semi-periodic table-infused water seeped in, Ed Stafford resisted drinking immediately, waiting for sediment to settle first. While waiting, he scavenged for containers. Given the area's frequent use by armed groups and smugglers, discarded trash was likely. His efforts paid off. Several wild plastic bottles materialized in the jungle, though only one had a cap. Filling it with filtered water, he took an experimental sip. The texture was surprisingly smooth, though it tasted distinctly like plaster water. Day 3. After a morning of hiking, he'd covered less than 3 kilometers. Progress through dense rainforest was agonizingly slow. Every step required vigilance. A single cut from thorny plants could quickly fester in this environment. Grumbling, he pressed on until salvation appeared. A pristine jungle stream. He plunged in face first, gulping down water far superior to yesterday's batch. Noticing fish darting beneath the surface, he marked the spot for tomorrow's fishing. Darkness was falling. That night, he vented to the camera again. Days of involuntary fasting had drained his energy reserves. Tomorrow, fish would be prioritized. Fishing day. At dawn, Ed Stafford eyed the fish hungrily. No more patience. He transformed his plastic bottle into a trap, cutting off the top and inverting it to create a funnel entrance. For bait, he tossed in captured ants and frogs. After setting multiple traps, he turned to fire-making, fashioning a hand drill from his shoelaces, and scavenged driftwood. The humid jungle fought back. An hour of furious drilling finally produced a wisp of smoke. His trademark manic grin flashed as he nurtured the ember into flames. The effort burned precious calories, making the fish trap's inspection urgent. Trap 1 held a single unlucky fish. Trap 2 delivered a bonus, 2 more. Without bothering to gut them, he tossed the fish directly into the flames. Sizzling fat announced dinner. Cue the Ed Stafford mukbang. Crunch. The taste? Irrelevant when starvation looms. 300 precious calories later, he felt reborn. Back pain vanished. Legs revitalized. In this moment, he crowned himself the ultimate bushcraft king. Day 5. Time flew by, and Ed Stafford woke up handsome as ever. He set off early, with over half the challenge completed. However, the river's flow didn't align with his destination. Reluctantly, he plunged back into the jungle. 5 hours later, his water supply was nearly exhausted. His expression grew increasingly grim. No question, finding water became his top priority. 2 more hours passed. The last drop in his bottle was gone. His mind fixated on one thing: water. Just as desperation peaked, a pristine jungle river appeared. No time for celebration. He flopped straight in to cool off. Nearby, signs of human activity caught his eye. Miraculously, he found a discarded pot, vastly superior to his rusty tin can. Determined to reward himself, he prepared to catch fish. First, he sharpened a stick into a spear point with his tetanus blade. Then, he lashed it to another stick with his backpack's elastic band, creating a makeshift fishing bow. Confident, he waded into the water. Whether due to inexperience or bad luck, hours of stabbing yielded nothing. Near dusk, a sudden burst of laughter escaped him. A finger-sized fish dangled from his spear. Emboldened, he soon landed another. But the surprises didn't end there. A banana tree laden with fruit stood by the river. Without hesitation, he unleashed a flurry of punches at the trunk. The tree toppled. Triumphant, he returned to camp with his haul. Fish chunks and roughly chopped bananas simmered into a hearty stew. Half an hour over the fire, dinner was served. Day 6. Haunted by past dehydration, Ed Stafford guzzled water before dawn. Then, back into the jungle. Day 7. The grueling pace left him drenched in sweat, malnutrition taking its toll. As the trees thinned, a banana plantation emerged. Beyond it, a massive river stretched before him. The production team had hinted the village lay near such a river. Whether this was the one or not, he drank his fill first. Just then, he spotted Odibo, preparing to transport bananas. A wave, a greeting, and Ed Stafford boarded the boat home. Challenge complete. As the undisputed king of wilderness survival, Ed Stafford never fails to feast, even in the harshest conditions. This time, he enjoyed tender, fall off the bone-roasted frog, followed by live cicada sashimi. The crowning achievement? A 2.5-pound wild chicken, stewed with wild ginger and roots, in a bamboo tube. Jungle bamboo chicken stew. For dessert? Charcoal grilled rat. What was supposed to be a survival show nearly turned into a gourmet episode. The mission. For this challenge, Ed Stafford would survive 10 days in Thailand's lawless Golden Triangle. No food, no water, not even hair. His backpack contained only emergency gear and filming equipment. Under the scorching sun, his first task was clear: find water. But the rugged terrain made navigation risky. Descending blindly could mean getting lost. Instead, he used his backpack as a central marker, scouting the surrounding valleys methodically. An hour later, he'd found nothing but bamboo. Not a drop of water. Dehydration was setting in. Just as he began worrying about taking the wrong path, he finally spotted several banana trees in the distance. Of course, Ed Stafford wouldn't miss such a find, especially the small black bananas hanging from them. Without his survival knife, he resorted to punching the trunk repeatedly. Falling debris provided a quick snack, enough to half-fill his stomach. Grunting with effort, he continued hammering the tree until it toppled over. The massive bunch of bananas could last days, or so he thought. One bite revealed rock-hard fruit, nearly damaging his recently fixed front teeth. Splitting one open, he found the flesh white with black streaks, clearly a recipe for disaster if eaten. Reluctantly, he discarded the entire bunch. Suddenly, thunder rumbled overhead. With no shelter prepared, his bald forehead wrinkled with worry. Too late to build one now, he improvised by fashioning a rain-resistant tunic from banana bark. Once dressed, he hauled a section of the trunk uphill, returning to his original spot, just as lightning flashed. Exhausted, he smashed open the trunk to drink its water. As thunder grew closer, he had no desire to become a lightning rod. Retreating to a sheltered mid-slope spot, he scattered leaves as bedding and resigned himself to a miserable night. Day 2. Though the storm never came, the plunging temperatures left him shivering violently. Breakfast was decided instantly. An unlucky cicada met its end between his teeth. After the light meal, he set off in a new direction for water. Along the way, he sampled unidentified fruits without hesitation. Their sour taste barely slowed him down. Soon, a grin spread across his face. A tiny stream appeared. No time for filtration. He drank straight from the ground. Rehydrated and energized, he scouted upstream for a campsite. An open clearing proved ideal. With the location secured, he searched the stream for tools. A razor-sharp stone became his perfect cutting implement. Next stop, the bamboo grove he'd spotted earlier. In survival terms, bamboo might as well be gold. Its versatility unmatched. But stone tools made harvesting agonizingly slow. Sawing, pulling, and hauling the poles back consumed over 5 grueling hours. Back at camp, he notched the bamboo, lashed the pieces together, and thatched the roof with banana leaves. His luxury jungle villa stood complete, until mosquitoes launched relentless attacks. Disgusted, he bathed in a cool spring, emerging refreshed and preening for the camera. Exhaustion claimed him as night fell. Day 3. With shelter done, fire became the priority. Bamboo scrapings formed tinder, rubbed vigorously between stone and bamboo. After 10 relentless minutes, smoke curled upward, his fastest fire starting yet. Flames soon followed. Ever resourceful, he split bamboo segments into water containers, boiled their contents over the fire, and added mysterious foraged ingredients. The resulting brew brought deep satisfaction. Now that he had secured the 3 essentials for survival, Ed Stafford finally turned his attention to finding food. He ventured out of the woods into an open area and decided to set up a stone-based rat trap. Any unlucky rodent that triggered the heavy rock would be instantly crushed. For bait, he simply skewered a grasshopper. Day 4. So far, Ed Stafford had only eaten insects and roots. Unsurprisingly, none of his traps had worked. Refusing to give up, he waded into the water, stooping low and feeling around. To his surprise, he managed to grab a frog. After proudly showing it off to the camera, he tried to skewer it with a stick, only for the clever amphibian to play dead and vanish the moment he looked away. Furious, he thrashed around in the water again. Luck struck. This time, an even plumper frog. Learning from his earlier mistake, he made sure this one met its end swiftly. Back at camp, he roasted it over the fire. The tender thigh meat fell right off the bone, so rich and flavorful that his ravenous eating spoke volumes. This protein-packed meal easily outclassed beef. Bolstered by his success, he set up a bird snare next, using a caterpillar as bait. Now, it was just a waiting game. That night, hailstones the size of fingers pelted down. Grateful for his sturdy shelter, Ed Stafford still found sleep impossible amid the deafening noise. At first light, he checked his traps and found a rat crushed beneath the rock. His face lit up with delight. Back at camp, he devoured his prize in the dark, unable to distinguish which parts he was eating. Not a scrap went to waste. Meat, bones, even the head disappeared into his hungry stomach. For once, he went to bed reasonably full. The next morning, he started the day with a leech sashimi appetizer. Now that all 4 survival essentials were secured, Ed Stafford allowed himself to enjoy the finer things. For easier water access, he crafted a bamboo canteen, smoothing the edges and adding a lid. Next, he fashioned a shower head from bamboo, then gleefully practiced his spiral orb technique. Feeling invincible, he grew overconfident. Day 8. To spice things up, he decided to explore the surrounding area. But first, he needed a new stone-cutting tool. After hours of searching, he found the perfect rock, lashed it to a stick, and created a formidable survival blade. Chopping down banana trees became effortless. Day 9. Before setting off, he made one last trap check. From a distance, he spotted an unlucky wild chicken hanging in his snare. That signature grin spread across his face. Another feast awaited. After packing up, he hit the trail, foraging for carbs along the way. Wild greens and ginger joined his provisions. Exhausted from the trek, he quickly plucked and butchered the chicken, cutting it into even pieces, before stuffing them into a bamboo tube. As the meal cooked, he couldn't suppress his glee. When the bamboo chicken finally steamed to perfection, the aroma alone was intoxicating. The wild ginger elevated the flavor to new heights. Between ecstatic bites, Ed Stafford kept muttering, "Oh my God." Stuffed and satisfied, he launched into one of his signature survival lectures. At this moment, he was undoubtedly the most legendary bushcraft king alive. The final day. As the plane came into view, Ed Stafford boarded it, marking the successful conclusion of this challenge. With an excited heart and trembling hands, the long silent Ed Stafford returns with a powerful sequel to his show Marooned. Using the same formula and familiar setup, he brings nothing but his mouth, embarking on a 10-day survival challenge in wildernesses around the world. Setting traps for caimans, enjoying delicious roasted fish, sweet and juicy cashews loaded with vitamins, and sashimi that only those who try it know its taste. Even nearing 50, Stafford still displays his youthful vigor. This episode takes him to the Orinoco region of the Republic of Colombia, home to many deadly creatures. Drought-induced wildfires make the animal's behavior even more unpredictable. Traveling upstream in a speedboat for several hours, he switches to an all-terrain jeep. Unable to wait, he strips off his shirt and gets into survival mode upon arrival. He relishes the adrenaline rush from facing the unknown, the same as in his earlier days. After reflecting, he strategizes for survival. To one side, the plains stretch out. On the other, a tall, rocky mountain beckons him to find a suitable living spot. He launches a drone for aerial shots through smart tracking. Stafford, with his gear, heads toward the rocky mountain. Fortunately, clouds cover the sun, mitigating the heat. Just 3 minutes into his relief, he spots something moving in the grass ahead, a highly venomous rattlesnake. He wisely decides against disturbing it, quickly capturing footage and moving on. By the time he reaches the rocky mountain, dusk has fallen. Breathing heavily, he climbs to the summit and immediately surveys the terrain. A forest spans the horizon on the right side of the mountain, and another forest, possibly along a river, lies to the left. Each has its advantages. The left forest is closer but smaller. The right is farther but larger and richer in resources. After weighing his options, he decides to check the nearer forest first, but it's too late to start today. He sets up camp on the mountaintop for the night. Nearby, he spots two round cacti. Desperate for hydration, he smashes them open with a stone, finding plenty of fresh pulp inside. He tastes it, and as expected, it's rich in water, temporarily quenching his thirst and providing him with some calories. Although it's low in calories, it's better than going hungry. He sleeps restlessly that night. Early the next morning, a light rain begins to fall. Stafford quickly leaves the summit, planning his route to the forest. He hurries down the mountain, where he encounters a sour sugar cane. Without hesitation, he eats the flower, comparing its taste to perfume. The cane itself, true to its name, contains a slightly sour juice, a hybrid between juicy fruit and a beverage. After this refreshing morning tea, Stafford continues towards his destination. As the rain stops and the temperature rises, a wildfire revives and advances toward the grasslands. Stafford is only 200 meters away from the flames, but manages to reach the dense forest in time. The forest acts like a firewall, keeping the wildfire at bay. As expected, there is a river nourishing both banks. Stafford quickly goes down to drink the water directly, deeming filtration and boiling unnecessary. Now that he has found the river, he uses his backpack as a floating device to travel downstream. Although this method conserves energy, it doesn't mean it doesn't burn calories. When he sees some curly palm fruit trees along the shore, he decides to gather some food. Picking up fallen curly palm fruits, Stafford indulges himself. Though not fully ripe, his desire for food overshadows the taste. He packs a few for later use. After 4 hours of drifting, he finally found an ideal spot to settle and planned to catch some fish from the river to satisfy his hunger. Ed Stafford decided to make a fishing trap using vines and twigs collected from the forest. He first formed a circle with the twigs on the ground, securing the top tightly. He then wove the vines to create the sides of the trap. However, vines were not readily available, as this was not a tropical rainforest. It took him 6 hours, and he still hadn't finished. With night approaching and considering the presence of cougars and jaguars, he also needed to build a shelter to protect against wild animals. Stafford gathered all the dead branches and trunks he could find, using a dense natural hedge to build a half-meter-high wall next to it for added safety during sleep. On the third day, after a good night's sleep, he continued collecting vines and finished the fishing trap by noon. He used curly palm fruits as bait, which he found tasty and hoped the fish would too. He eagerly set the trap, but after 50 minutes, he was disappointed to find it empty. Not giving up, he added more curly palm fruits and placed some grass around the entrance to hinder the fish from escaping. Despite the modifications, the trap still caught nothing, leading Stafford to doubt his choice of location. He wished he had initially chosen the larger forest on the right side of the Rocky Mountain. Fortunately, it was not too late to change plans. Once the harsh midday sun had set, he re-entered the plain with all his gear, heading toward the other forest to avoid dehydration. After 5 hours of walking, he reached the edge of the forest. Entering at night was too risky, so he spent another night on the grassland. The next morning, he was awakened by the sound of water and followed it to find a river teeming with fish. He immediately placed the fishing trap in the river. Then, finding a termite mound on the plain, he kicked it and used the termites as bait, hoping for better results. While waiting, he explored the forest and found a wild fruit known to cause permanent hair loss, although he, being bald, was not concerned. He decided not to eat them, but to use their shells as bowls. Returning to the river to check the trap, he finally had success, catching 4 fish. Having not eaten meat for days, he immediately enjoyed the freshest sashimi from one fish, providing about 10 grams of protein. He planned to roast the remaining fish. With time short and tasks pressing, Stafford opted not to use primitive fire-starting methods. He quickly fashioned a bow drill set from his pants drawstring and a grooved stone base. To reduce the risk of accidentally starting a wildfire, he decided to build a small platform for the fire. He gathered large palm leaves, spread mud from the riverbank over them, then constructed 2 mounds to support the mud-covered leaves. Thanks to the hot climate drying the wood sufficiently, he quickly generated sparks with the bow drill and transferred the fire to the platform using the leaves as a tray. During this time, the trap caught 3 more fish, giving him 6 for lunch. He skewered them all and roasted them beside the fire. It didn't take long for Ed Stafford to enjoy the fragrant roasted fish. To maximize energy intake, he consumed the entire fish, including the less tasty innards and bones. Watching the situation progressively improve, Stafford finally felt relieved. On the 5th day, he cracked open the hair loss fruit with a stone, discarding all the pulp, including the white inner layer of the shell, which could also cause hair loss. He then burned the purple inner layer and washed the shell by the river, turning it into a usable bowl. The energy from the small fish was insufficient. He needed more food. During his exploration, Stafford found cashew trees with plenty of fresh fruit overhead. He tasted one, enjoying the rich juice flowing down his fingers and cheeks, reminiscent of papaya mixed with watermelon. Delighted, he packed a dozen to take back to camp. Although these fruits lacked juicy flesh, he roasted them over the fire for 15 minutes, cracked them open with a stone, and found the cashew nuts inside delicious. Now his vitamin intake was sufficient, but he was still low on protein. Stafford ventured into the forest, spotting some worm castings on the ground. An idea struck him. He dug into the earth with a stick and soon captured a shrimp worm, a creature rich in protein. After cleaning the mud off, he ate it, finding it crunchy and disgustingly slimy, far more unpleasant than he anticipated. Quickly, he ate some cashew nuts to rid his mouth of the taste. Previously sleeping on the ground, Stafford decided to elevate his wilderness survival to comfort mode by making a bed. He planned the position and style, using 3 trees by the river to create a triangular bed frame. After attempting to collect logs by hand and realizing the trees were too small to bear weight, he decided to make an axe. He split a wooden handle with a sharp-edged stone, inserted the stone, and secured it with vines. Choosing a tree as thick as his arm, he chopped around it with the stone until he could push it over. With the sturdy material, he erected a triangular frame by the river. Then, he chopped down an unlucky palm and used the top branches to form a bed base, with soft, cool leaves as a mattress. He finished the bed before dark and found it so comfortable that he didn't want to get up the next morning. For breakfast, he crunched on cashew nuts and drank several cups of delicious cashew juice, which was so rich that he doubted he was still in a survival situation. Since switching to termite bait, the fishing trap had not failed. Unfortunately, the fish were too small to meet Stafford's caloric needs. He needed more food, and the vast forest required a long time to explore. Stafford deployed a drone to find suitable foraging spots. After some time, he discovered a larger body of water a kilometer away, inhabited by caiman and peacock bass, possibly hosting other large animals and fish sufficient for a hearty meal. Stafford planned to visit the next day. At dusk, he found some wild fruits in the forest. Unsure of the variety but undeterred, he tried one and was surprised by its unexpected sweetness, resembling figs. Pleased with the taste, he gathered more scattered fruits around him, planning to add them to his food supply. On the 7th day, Ed Stafford set off towards the forest he had discovered the day before, aiming to secure some substantial food. As the river widened, he remained alert and soon noticed a turtle on the bank, camouflaged like a dry branch, hard to spot without careful observation. Unfortunately, it was a protected species in Colombia, so Stafford had to release it with regret. A few steps further, he spotted a fish underwater, also protected and off-limits for consumption. Continuing along the riverbank, Stafford finally identified his quarry, a caiman, with only part of its head visible among the branches on the opposite bank. It was not feasible to capture it by force, but he had a better plan. Stafford found a path the caiman used to exit the water. Setting a noose trap there would likely yield a high success rate. He immediately started implementing his plan by bending a nearby sapling for elasticity and arranging branches at the exit to guide the caiman. He left a gap in the middle where he set the noose and used a few fish as bait. If the caiman attempted to cross for the fish, it would get caught in the noose, triggering the trap and suspending it in the air. After testing, the trap proved very sensitive, which satisfied Stafford. Returning to camp, Stafford ate cashew nuts and shared some life lessons on camera, emphasizing the importance of basic actions like opening one's mouth to eat and moving legs to walk. On the 8th day, he eagerly checked the noose trap downstream after waking up. After a tense 1-kilometer trek, Stafford was thrilled to find the trap triggered with a caiman caught upside down. He cautiously approached, held the caiman by the neck, and with a sharpened stick aimed at the neck, He struck with a stone to break the spine. With shaking hands, Stafford processed the large animal, ensuring no meat was wasted to respect the sacrifice of his prey. He used an axe to laboriously separate the parts, noting that the caiman was mostly lean meat, with the fattiest part being the tail, which he was most eager to eat. He roasted it all over charcoal, finally enjoying substantial food after a busy week. Once it was perfectly cooked, Stafford was ravenous. He savored the meat, describing the caiman meat as having a texture and flavor between fish and chicken, firm, dense, and aromatic. It was so delicious that he lost interest in the fish. After the meal, feeling a bit greasy, Stafford mashed some wild fruits in a bowl, added crushed cashew nuts, and heated it over the charcoal for 3 minutes to make a hot fig pudding with roasted cashews. With enough food for 2 days, Stafford elevated his survival to sheer enjoyment. On the final day, he washed off all the dirt in the river, marking a successful end to this episode of the challenge. When a wilderness expert encounters a Chinese region populated with protected animals, it sparks an unexpected outcome. Initially, it seemed like hitting a steel plate, but Ed Stafford managed to break the curse of being hungry for 3 days and 9 meals. He enjoyed delicious lobster skewers, ripe wild loquats, and sweet, juicy plums, all nourished by mountain spring water and made into snail soup. His quality of life far surpassed that of the Japanese emperor. In this episode, Ed Stafford visits the karst mountains of Guilin in Guangxi, China. The terrain is rugged, with venomous snakes everywhere, and the weather is unpredictable, demanding his full attention. He travels deep into the mountains on a fisherman's bamboo raft, landing after half an hour. From there, he moves away from the river to find a feng shui spot ideal for wilderness survival. After showing his unchanged equipment to the camera, Stafford sets off with his backpack. Barefoot, he treads on the jagged rocks, risking injury, and navigates through tree-covered cliffs ready to claim any careless life. He remains vigilant, especially for venomous snakes, having been warned about their abundance in these woods. Just hours in, he spots a banded crate in the grass, raising his adrenaline, but not enough to disturb his seasoned composure. After trekking further, he finds a cave suitable for shelter. Though damp, it provides sufficient protection from the elements, prompting him to set up camp temporarily. Exhausted from the journey, Stafford looks nearby for something to energize himself and quickly finds a grasshopper on a rock. Without fuss, he crunches it down. He continues searching and soon catches another, removing the inedible wings and consuming the rest. The barbed legs almost made him take off, but after enjoying this simple appetizer, he finds the grass outside the cave more comfortable than its hard, damp walls. With no rain in the forecast, he sleeps on the ground, enduring a painfully cold night. The next day, chilled by the low temperatures, Stafford looks for food and water. He finds plants similar to those back in the UK, like plantain seeds rich in protein and minerals, perfect for a salad. He also discovers wood sorrel, which tastes like lemons. He picks larger leaves to make cups, fills them with wood sorrel, adds bright red snakeberries for color, and sprinkles on plantain seeds. The resulting fruit and vegetable salad is tangy, refreshing, and juicy. Though not abundant, it's enough to lift his spirits. After a cold, wet night, starting a fire becomes his next challenge. The damp climate makes it difficult to find suitable materials, but he finds a small patch of bamboo, often called the hardware store of the jungle. He uses dead bamboo, an excellent tinder, to make a fire saw. He scrapes shavings for tinder, places them in the center of a bamboo piece, and uses another piece to create friction. Though it sounds easy, the cold and damp conditions prevent him from producing sparks, forcing him to suppress his frustration and spend another night on the grass. Unexpectedly, rain started falling at midnight. Ed Stafford moved his equipment to the cave, thankful that it was secure enough to prevent any water from seeping in. The rain continued until dawn, but Stafford didn't have time to wait it out, as he had already decided to leave and find a new campsite with better sunlight and lower humidity. Shivering, he trekked for a long time until the weather cleared and the temperature rose slightly. Along the way, Stafford found a plum tree by the roadside with ripe yellow plums falling to the ground for easy picking. Eating the sweet fruit improved his mood significantly, lifting him from his previous drenched spirits. Fortunate to find such a tree, he gathered several pounds of plums, ensuring he wouldn't go hungry. Wandering through the mountains, he found some sour green plants dock. True to their name, they were slightly acidic. Stafford wouldn't pass up any chance to consume energy, although they were a bit tough, like chewing on wood. Additionally, Stafford found a nightshade plant with black berries. Some say they are edible, others say they are poisonous. Stafford didn't dare eat them, as unripe green nightshade berries contain high levels of toxic solanine, although the ripe black fruits are edible. Nevertheless, he was cautious. As Stafford searched for a new campsite, he was constantly foraging. Upon finding a bamboo grove, he stopped to pick bamboo shoots, eating as he searched for a campsite. After another half-hour of trekking, he found a flat area around a pomelo tree with open terrain and abundant sunlight. Exactly what he was looking for. Using the tree and nearby slope, he quickly sketched a shelter in his mind. He collected bamboo from a nearby grove to create a double-sloped roof frame, anchoring one end to the tree trunk and the other into the slope. He then tied a crossbeam on each side to add stability with additional bamboo supports. Next, he covered the structure with banana leaves. After busy preparations, he managed to complete the basic roof before dark, ensuring he wouldn't get rained on at night. With the remaining bamboo and banana leaves, he improvised a bed, keeping him warm and off the cold ground even without a fire. On the fourth day, determined to make a fire, Stafford had endured a night of waking up cold. The roof was still primitive and couldn't withstand a storm, so he first cut several bundles of wild grass to layer on the roof's sides, securing it with bamboo to enhance the shelter's protection. Now focused on making a fire, he tried the bamboo fire saw again. This time, the environment and materials were drier, and he was more prepared. Learning from his previous failure, he stabilized the fire saw with a folded piece of underwear against his chest to eliminate any movement. Successfully creating sparks, he blew gently and soon had a roaring fire. Looking at the burning flames, Stafford felt a huge relief. Now he could go searching for food. Nearby, he found a loquat tree with many ripe fruits fallen to the ground. He collected a large handful of loquats, enjoying their delicious taste. Considering the importance of sleep for survival, Stafford decided to upgrade his bed. He dug up stones from the ground to build 2 low walls inside the shelter, filling the gaps with mud for stability. He then placed bamboo on top to form a bed frame and covered it with elastic banana leaves, completing his upgraded bed. That night, Stafford sat by the fire eating loquats, significantly boosting his happiness index. Awakening the next day, he felt refreshed and energetic, ready to make the most of his days ahead. The terrain in the mountains was too complex, so Ed Stafford once again used advanced technology. He deployed a drone to discover a river leading to a cave, suspecting it would contain ample food. Determined to explore, he decided to make torches for illumination inside the cave. He found a pine forest and collected resin from the pine trees, then melted the resin in a fresh bamboo tube over a fire. He thoroughly mixed in some wood shavings and stuffed them into the bamboo tube soaked with flammable resin, making 2 torches of different sizes. Using a fresh bamboo tube to contain the smoldering material, he quickly carried it to the cave entrance and ignited a fire to light the torches. As he walked deeper into the cave, it became narrower and darker until he saw a light ahead. He discovered a deep sinkhole, but the river below had little in the way of fish or other animals, only some snails. Using the torch as a light, Stafford collected 32 snails from the water. It wasn't a large haul, but still a victory. Since the cave didn't require further exploration, Stafford planned to gather some spices to cook the snails for dinner. He found wild onions in the mountains, easily spotted by their white flowers in the grass. Looking around, he also came across a taro plant and dug up a tuber that could provide carbohydrates. With these ingredients, his dinner was ready to prepare. He filled a thicker bamboo tube with water, added the cleaned snails and taro, which he bit into smaller pieces, and 3 wild onions. Stafford knew how to make do with his culinary skills. He placed it over the fire to cook for a long time until it was well cooked as night fell. Eagerly, he sat in front of the camera to eat. The taro was like unsalted cooked potatoes, the onions were sharply flavorful, and the snails were fresh and tasty. He finished by drinking the delicious broth, praising the meal enthusiastically, and cleaning the pot completely. Although he couldn't describe his life as luxurious, it was much better than at the start. On the 9th day, Stafford knew he needed a real protein feast to satisfy his stomach and to have something to report back to the show. He found a stream in the mountains, home to crayfish and crabs, which were not very fast, making them relatively easy to catch. Stafford felt like he was in Eden, harvesting all the crayfish and crabs he saw. After a while, he brought back 10 crayfish and 3 crabs, skewered them, and grilled them over the fire. In just 10 minutes, they were crisply done on the outside and tender inside. Facing the camera, Stafford smiled like a true food lover, peeling the crayfish and popping the meat into his mouth, satisfied with the tender taste. While it wasn't the same as devouring large chunks of meat like lamb, the variety in his diet did justice to his reputation as a wilderness expert. After enjoying this relatively lavish meal, he woke up ready to leave the next day. Before leaving, adhering to the principle of not leaving anything behind for others to find, Stafford meticulously dismantled the shelter. He then packed his equipment and walked out of the mountains, successfully concluding this survival challenge. Ed Stafford, nearing 50 years old, will be dropped into the wilderness around the world, following the familiar formula and routine. He will survive 10 days without bringing any supplies, relying solely on his skills. He sets traps to catch rabbits and crafts bows and arrows to hunt pheasants. This episode takes him to the Orongo Mountains in Namibia, Africa, a hot, dry, and sparsely populated region with more fierce animals and venomous snakes than people. The terrain, at an average altitude of 2,500 meters, truly makes this a no-man's land. Stafford, tapping his forehead, decides to take on the challenge. He arrives at the starting point by rented vehicle, with adrenaline surging. After checking his filming equipment and launching a drone to scout the area, he spots a rocky area several kilometers south that is conducive to survival. He quickly retrieves the drone and heads there with his backpack. The region is home to many venomous snakes. A wrong step on a wooden stake or sandy beach could be deadly. The threats from the bushes are also significant, as this is the habitat of black rhinos. An encounter with these could be fatal due to their powerful impact. After trekking under the blazing sun for 3 hours, Stafford reaches the rocks just before suffering heat stroke and rests in the shade, visibly pained by the journey. His strategy is to avoid the sun's peak hours and be active at sunrise and dusk. Once recovered, Stafford finds a cheetah-eaten antelope carcass behind a cave. The dried hide could be used for shoes, but without water to soften it, he resorts to using his urine and flattens it with stones. While waiting, he needs to find a water source. Having consulted local hunters for survival tips before arriving, he finds a withered plant with a large, water-rich bulbous rhizome. The sandy soil makes it easy to dig, and Stafford soon extracts the rhizome. He crushes the flesh with a stone and squeezes out the juice, which is refreshingly sweet and hydrating, tasting like wet potatoes. This temporarily quenches his thirst. Now, Stafford begins making shoes. He picks a piece of basalt, selecting sharp-edged fragments as cutting tools. He traces his foot outline on the hide and cuts out the soles. Limited by the rudimentary tools, it takes 2 hours to cut the soles. By then, it's dark, and he must spend the night. The next day, before it gets hot, he urgently needs to find a water source, as the rhizome's relief is only temporary. After a long walk, Stafford notices numerous antelope droppings and follows the tracks. The increasing animal signs indicate a nearby water source. Finally, he spots birds running from a hole and finds a water hole as expected. Desperate with thirst, and despite the larvae in the water, he has no means to filter or carry it, so he drinks directly with his hands. Next, Stafford plans to find a suitable cave nearby to move his camp and start surviving. He keeps an eye on resources, especially materials for starting a fire. A straight tree branch is perfect. He packs 2 for backup. Later, he finds a cave near the waterhole with ancient rock paintings, stone fragments for cutting, and broken pottery. Stafford decides to move his camp there, but first needs to start a fire. He turns the 2 branches into a hand drill, rubs them against dry grass for half an hour, and soon a large ember forms and bursts into flames with a few breaths of oxygen. Ed Stafford plans to move all his equipment. Along the way, he encounters a shepherd's tree raspberry. Seeing the fruit-laden branches, he switches to foraging mode. Facing his first meal in 24 hours, he urgently needs to refuel his body for upcoming activities. The raspberries are undoubtedly the solution. It takes him about 20 minutes to fill up. After moving his camp, with the sun blazing overhead, Stafford decides to finish making his shoes in the cave, using thin straps to tie the soles to his feet, completing the leather shoes. In the morning, while searching for water, he had noticed a stone wall with large black and white patterns outside, caused by rabbit droppings over time. He goes there hoping to catch a rabbit, but sees no activity by nightfall. On the third day, he wakes up with a headache and nausea due to both lack of sleep and drinking dirty water. With no other water source found, Stafford continues to draw water from the same pit. To increase his hunting success, he needs to make some ropes for traps, a skill he learned from locals. He finds several agave plants in the wilderness, whose leaves contain rich fibers ideal for making durable ropes. He mashes the leaves with a stone, separates the pulp, and extracts the white fibers to make several traps, a method he often uses. He just needs a flat stone and 3 sticks, which function as the support, trigger, and activator. While preparing materials, he catches a lizard passing by. Until now, Stafford hasn't consumed any animal protein, so he cleans and eats the lizard, though it doesn't taste great. He then finds a rock wall frequented by rabbits, sets traps at the entrances, and blocks other gaps with dead branches and weeds to ensure rabbits can't escape through other cracks. After setting multiple traps during the day, he waits patiently overnight. At dawn, he leaves the cave to check the traps and finds a rabbit surprisingly large. Not knowing exactly when it was trapped, and with the hot weather, he decides not to leave it out long. He returns to the cave, skins the rabbit, cleans it properly, and cooks the organs on skewers over a charcoal fire. After 15 minutes, the organs are firm, juicy, and perfectly cooked. Stafford savors each bite, enjoying the long-awaited protein feast, and eats slowly to savor the meat. Next, he prepares the whole cleaned rabbit, also skewered and roasted over the charcoal. After about an hour, the rabbit meat is cooked to perfection, tender but not greasy. Starvation enhances the flavor, making the meal satisfying even without spices like cumin or chili. Today is only the 4th day of the challenge, but Stafford wants more achievements. He plans to make a set of bow and arrows. On his way to find suitable wood for the bow, he discovers a giraffe femur. To most, it's just a bone, but for him it's valuable. The deer tendons remaining on the surface are excellent bowstring material, stronger and more elastic than plant fibers. On his way back, he picks a branch slightly thicker than his thumb for the bow. He cleans the bark off, sands the surface smooth with sand grains, and uses the heat from the fire to dry it out and increase its hardness. Then he tears all the tendons off the deer bone, softens them by pounding with a stone, and tears them into fine fibers. He wets them with saliva and stretches them straight, gradually weaving the bowstring. Paired with the dried stick, Stafford successfully crafts a bow strung with quality sinew. Next, Ed Stafford just needs to make a few arrows before he can go hunting. The next day, he is woken by hyenas, but luckily, the fire keeps them at bay. Their closest tracks are less than 20 meters from the campsite. More troubling is that several hoped-for traps failed to catch any rabbits. However, fortunately, his body has adapted to the stagnant water, and he no longer suffers from gastrointestinal discomfort. Stafford installs a camera on a nearby tree to see what other animals come to drink. On his way back, he collects branches for arrow shafts and finds some guinea fowl feathers for fletching. The processing of the arrow shafts is similar to that of the bow. He cleans the bark, dries the inside moisture, straightens any bends, and sharpens one end into an arrowhead. He then ties the guinea fowl feathers at the end with string, a step that tests his patience and manual skills. With over a decade of survival experience, he crafts the fletching perfectly. Now, with the bow strung and arrows made, he needs to test their power. The force is sufficient to wound small to medium-sized animals. On the 6th day of the challenge, Stafford goes hunting with his bow and arrows. Despite seeing lots of animal droppings, he finds no traces of the animals themselves. Carrying arrows in his mouth is inconvenient. He needs to make a quiver. So, Stafford allows himself to return to the cave empty-handed. Locals use the roots of umbrella trees to make quivers. He mimics this by digging next to an umbrella tree and finds the roots 30 centimeters underground. It takes him half an hour to break off a half-meter-long piece. He peels off a small portion of the bark at both ends, digs a pit to bury the root, and lights a fire above it to shrink the core. After a few hits on a rock, the bark peels off, forming a crucial part of the quiver. He wraps the bottom with the rabbit skin he previously secured, creating an authentic bushman quiver. Paired with the bow, Stafford looks like a seasoned hunter. Equipped with a fire-starting kit and his homemade arrows, he is ready to track and hunt animals living off the land. A day has passed since he set up the camera by the waterhole. Curious about what it has captured, he checks and sees a few small impalas drinking. Deciding to ambush here, he uses 2 rocks for cover and collects thorny branches to build a barrier around them, hiding behind the rocks to take shots. In the evening, several guinea fowls pass by. After hours of waiting, he gets his chance, but trembling hands make his shot miss by a little. The opportunity quickly lost as the fowls move beyond his bow's range. That night, Stafford spends the night behind the rocks, enduring until dawn, hoping to catch animals coming to drink in the morning. Yet by mid-morning, no animals appear. However, he discovers that the guinea fowls roost in a tree at night. He can hide on nearby rocks, giving him a height advantage for easier shooting. Before dark, he eats some raspberries for calories and drinks some water to refresh himself. As the sun nears the horizon, a guinea fowl lands in the tree to rest. This time, Stafford, standing on the rock, draws his bow fully. Success or failure hinges on this moment. He reignites a strong fire, plucks the guinea fowl, and roasts it next to the fire. 3 days since eating the rabbit, Stafford successfully hunts again, enjoying a delicious meal of juicy grouse meat by the fire. The joy of his labor is something only he can fully appreciate, satisfied with the challenge. For the next 2 days, he continues to hunt, trap, and forage around the waterhole. Steadily, he reaches the 10th day of the challenge, packs his gear, and walks out of the bush, successfully concluding this episode of wilderness survival. Several months later, Ed Stafford returns to the challenge of island survival. This time, the location is in the central part of Panama's Pearl Islands. Although he has experienced island survival before, the 60-day ordeal on Olarua Island left a significant shadow over him. Therefore, Stafford still feels some fear as he embarks on this new adventure. After arriving at the location via the show's helicopter, high tide prevents the pilot from landing on the beach. Thus, Stafford has to jump from the helicopter into the sea. As the helicopter flies away, he manages to reach his backpack amidst the waves and easily makes his way to the beach using the currents. Initially, entering survival mode, his body is somewhat panicked. It takes some time to adjust himself, stabilize his emotions, and formulate the most advantageous plan. Fresh water is always a priority in island survival, especially now during the local dry season, when midday temperatures can reach 40 degrees Celsius. Looking around, Stafford sees coconut trees by the seaside. The coconut water can temporarily stave off dehydration. The coconuts high up are unreachable, but those on the ground just require bending over to pick up. Stafford opts for the slightly green coconuts, as they contain more juice and nutrients. He quickly thinks of a way to open them by smashing them against the sharp edges of rocks on the beach, a skill he mastered during his 2 months on Olarua Island. The coconut flesh becomes his first meal on the island, temporarily solving his water and food issues and significantly boosting his morale. However, to thrive on the island, this alone is not enough. Stafford finds a dried-up river mouth not far from the landing point. The light gray soil suggests there might be fresh water underground. By digging just a few dozen centimeters, he hopes to solve his water challenge. He grabs a stick and starts digging, but, disappointingly, he hits a layer of solid rock, eliminating the possibility of finding fresh water. Feeling frustrated, Stafford treks upstream along the riverbed, hoping to find an undried pool. Unfortunately, the riverbed is covered with thorny, dried branches, unfriendly to bare feet. After stepping on 3 thorns within 50 meters, he is forced to return to camp. Using modern technology to explore the environment, drone footage reveals a beach scattered with rocks and a dark trench. If there is any fresh water on the island, it is most likely located there. Thus, Stafford decides to relocate his camp to this site. However, it's too late in the day to move, so he arranges to spend the night. He picks a deflated football as a pillow and uses plastic foam for a headrest, building a windbreak with sand. Lying in a nearby pit is passable but not comfortable as the chilling sea breeze makes his teeth chatter. As soon as the temperature slightly rises, Stafford walks along the beach to the site he found the previous day. The high tide during the day and the dense forest behind make it almost impossible to proceed. Known for not being a strong swimmer and carrying several kilos of equipment, he decides to build a raft instead. The beach is littered with washed-up trash, a sad sight for anyone who loves the planet. But at this moment, it becomes Stafford's lifeline. A nearly 3-meter-long plank serves as the main body of the raft. He then scavenges for plastic foam around the area. Thanks to the worsening problem of environmental pollution, he quickly finds enough foam and rope. The midday sun could easily burn his skin, so Stafford wisely rests under the shade of a tree for a while. During this time, he spots a plant nearby known as the death apple. The fruit looks harmless, sweet, and juicy, but is highly toxic. Even contact with its sap can cause illness. Fortunately, Ed Stafford spotted some beech almond trees overhead. Unfortunately, the fruit was not yet ripe, so he could only taste a bit of its sourness. Still, the real energy source was coconuts. After resting, he moved all materials under the shade of a tree, sandwiched the plastic foam between the planks, broke a piece of old metal, and sharpened its edge on a rock. He cut rope from a tangled mess and securely tied everything together. After all this, Stafford was tired and hungry, and in no condition to paddle out to sea, so he rested another night. The next day, waking up in the cold, he needed some energy. Walking along the beach, Stafford found some noni fruits, also known as vomit fruit. As the name suggests, they taste awful. Despite the taste resembling car battery acid, he gained much-needed sugar to stimulate his brain and unlock his body's potential. With this boost, Stafford paddled out on his raft, which supported his and his backpack's weight. Without proper food and exerting all his strength, he finally reached the new campsite after 3 hours of sailing. Exhausted, he collapsed on the beach like a beached turtle and rested for a few minutes before scrambling to a dry riverbed behind the forest, desperately searching for fresh water. Stafford found fresh water under a rock, but it was full of fallen leaves and looked filthy. Unwilling to drink it directly as before, he filled 8 plastic bottles with the dirty water and began making a filter. He cut the bottom off a bottle to create a funnel-shaped shell, stuffed it with mesh-like coconut tree bark as the first layer, then dug out charcoal from an old fire pit for the second layer, and finally used beech almond leaves and pebbles. The filter was complete, but the lack of sand meant the filtered water looked unappetizingly black. He then placed the water in sunlight to use UV rays to kill the bacteria. After 4 hours, he drank the first mouthful of fresh water since landing on the island. The taste wasn't great, and it took finishing a whole bottle before he felt better. On the 4th day of survival, Stafford decided to focus on foraging and started a fire using the fire plow method with 2 hibiscus tree branches. The friction generated embers, which he placed into coconut tree bark and gently fanned into flames. Once the fire was established, his first thought was to make tea. He hung a bottle of water over the fire, carefully adjusting the height so the heat would warm the water without melting the plastic. Suddenly he saw a snake coming out of the bushes, weighing at least 20 kilograms. Surprisingly, he chose not to harm it, respecting its struggle to grow so large on a barren island. Perhaps aging has softened him, as killing such a large creature would make him sad. Instead, he let the snake go and focused on his warm, comforting tea. With the water level at its lowest, it was time to search for dinner. He moved heavy rocks to collect sea stars, sea cucumbers just a year old, small snails attached to the rocks, and some crabs. The haul wasn't big, but it filled his pockets. Without finding a cooking pot on the beach, he used plastic bags as a substitute, placing his sea harvest in a water-filled bag to heat up. Waiting for the food to cook took a while, and it was night by the time he could eat. Picking up a sea star leg, he expected it to be firm, juicy, and dense, but spit it out after just 3 seconds due to its terrible taste. Crab and snails were somewhat edible, being more shell than meat, but they at least provided some protein. The next day, Ed Stafford said he needed a better food source. Measuring the land by foot was too laborious. He had to rely on the drone at crucial times. This time, the drone found a mangrove forest on the other side of the island, likely a habitat for fish, making it an excellent spot for foraging. Stafford then ventured into nearby woods, where, in one of the few accessible areas, he found a lemon tree with many fruits on the ground. He filled his pockets with lemons and returned to camp, ready to head to the mangrove forest. Using the same makeshift raft, he paddled around the island, finally arriving at the destination before exhaustion set in. After securing the raft to prevent it from being carried away by the tide, he plunged into the mangrove forest. Using an underwater camera, he saw many fish and started digging in the mud for clams, quickly finding his first one. Initially unsure of finding any, the sight of clams was a relief. Energized, he continued, and joyfully collected 26 large clams, enough for a decent meal. Back at camp, Stafford placed the clams on the fire to heat until their shells slightly opened, then peeled out the meat and marinated it in a copious amount of lemon juice. The acidity of the lemon cooked the meat, requiring several hours to ferment. Meanwhile, he found a relatively intact fishing net. Having not slept well for days, he didn't think of using the net for fishing but made a hammock instead, knowing that good sleep is crucial for maintaining mental clarity. He was very satisfied with the comfort the hammock provided. 2 hours later, the ceviche was ready. Stafford made himself a pair of chopsticks, finding them more convenient than a knife and fork. The tangy clam meat was delicious, and he couldn't stop eating. The substantial protein intake quickly restored his body to good condition, so much so that he lay in the hammock before dark, not wanting to move. Over the next few days, he foraged in rock pools and the mangrove forest, enjoying his time until the 9th morning when he saw iguana tracks on the beach. Their meat would provide much more than clams. Iguanas, being cold-blooded, need to warm up on the beach, making them easy to catch when still. The hammock net could be useful here. By tying stones at a few corners, he could turn it into a throwing net to trap an iguana. Stafford set the net on the beach and hid in the woods, waiting for an iguana to appear. After some time, an iguana showed up in the camera's view. He threw the net and pounced, capturing the iguana by hand as the net didn't fully cover it. After humanely dispatching the iguana, he extracted a clutch of unhatched eggs from its belly, a rare delicacy. While roasting the iguana, he set up a second grill and stewed the eggs in a bottle of water. Once steam began to escape, he eagerly tasted them, finding the eggs runny, just how he liked them. Before his main meal, he decided to make lemon tea, showing he was living well. The roasted iguana, with its firm, succulent red meat reminiscent of juicy chicken legs, was satisfying, providing at least 500 calories. This was followed by a cup of lemon tea. After a full meal, as the sun nearly set, the sound of an engine signaled the successful end of this challenge. The next day, Ed Stafford embarked on a challenge in the forest and snow-covered wilderness of Changji Mountain in China. At the insistence of the production team, he reluctantly wore warm clothing and rode a snowmobile to the starting point. After making polite farewells to the staff, he was set to survive on his own for the next 10 days. The environment proved extremely harsh. Stafford struggled with waist-deep snow right from the start, which was exhausting to traverse. Soon after he ventured into the mountains, a heavy snowfall began. His initial plan was to find a river and set up camp along its bank, but the worsening weather forced him to stop and build a snow shelter nearby until conditions improved. A snow shelter involves piling up a large amount of snow and waiting for the surface to harden before digging out a circular cave. Stafford started by marking the outline on the ground and inserting a few branches within it to make it more visible. He then piled snow in the center, waiting for it to freeze solid enough to dig without collapsing. During this time, Stafford collected materials to make snowshoes. Y-shaped branches he found nearby were suitable, and with no cutting tools, he had to break off branches using brute force. These branches would form the frame of the snowshoes. He also gathered plenty of vines nearby, solving his rope needs. If thirsty, he would eat small handfuls of snow to stay hydrated without lowering his core body temperature too much. Once the snow pile had solidified, Stafford used frozen bark as a digging tool and vigorously scooped out the inside. After 2 hours of relentless effort, he managed to carve out enough space for sleeping and working. He then cut some spruce branches from nearby trees to insulate himself from the cold, damp ground before starting on the snowshoes. The construction process for the snowshoes was straightforward. He used the vines to bind several crossbars across the hollow part of the branch frame, employing a durable and practical cross-knot technique. Finally, he created a cover for the top, and the snowshoes were ready. As darkness approached, he poked a hole in the wall with a stick to ensure basic air circulation. His backpack blocked most of the external wind. Before sleeping, he took off his outer waterproof boots but kept the inner liners to let moisture escape. A decade ago, while filming in Siberia, he had neglected the impact of moisture, leading to severe frostbite and 3 surgeries to recover. This time, he was determined to let his feet breathe to avoid repeating past mistakes. Overall, today's progress was quite smooth. The next day, the wind and snow ceased, and Stafford, wearing his snowshoes, set off to find a campsite. He didn't sink into the snow as he had the day before, and his progress was faster. His goal was to head downhill, where the temperatures were higher, the snow less dense, and signs of animal activity indicated an ideal survival spot. After trekking for an hour or so, Stafford heard the sound of flowing water. The pine forest was littered with fallen cones, with pine nuts inside, providing the only food source he could find. He enjoyed a few to energize himself and took 4 more as snacks for the road. Following the sound, Stafford found the stream, drank deeply, and felt rehydrated. His plan was to follow the stream downstream until it was large enough to possibly have fish, and then set up camp. As the altitude decreased, the surrounding forest began to show more signs of life. 2 roe deer appeared, and Stafford looked on with regret, knowing that even sparrows are protected in China, let alone the deer. As the day faded, he decided to make a tree well for shelter. He shook off the snow from the lower branches and dug under the tree. The excavated snow was piled around the pit to create low walls. Then, using the tree trunk as a center, he arranged several branches until they were dense enough to block the wind and snow. Finally, he placed a few poles on the surface as a bed frame and covered them with spruce branches. This setup would allow cold air to sink to the bottom of the pit, letting Stafford sleep in a warmer environment than outside. On the 3rd day, Ed Stafford set out early with his snowshoes, looking for a place suitable for both making a fire and fishing. The current location clearly wasn't right. After crossing the forest, he finally saw a wide, frozen river. The other bank, with much less snow, seemed like an ideal spot to camp. Going around would take too much time and effort, so Stafford decided to take a risk and cross the ice river directly, despite many areas having thin ice. Throughout the journey, Stafford was extremely cautious, but he made it to the other side without incident. He chose to set up camp on a hillside next to the river, knowing he needed to get a fire going before sunset. In cold environments, it's usually not advisable to make fire by friction due to the moisture, but the air here was dry enough to find plenty of dry wood. Stafford prepared the tinder and his manual fire drilling kit and started the fire-making process. Unfortunately, the first sparks died out quickly. He kept at it with the drill, and just before darkness fell, he managed to produce a second batch of sparks and blew them into a flame. In the wilderness, he usually conserves wood by using a star-shaped fire layout, but in cold weather, he switches to a long body-length fire, a technique he learned while surviving in Norway, which emits much more heat. Despite sleeping in the open that night, he didn't feel too cold. The next day, Stafford went to the river to hydrate and discovered animal tracks on the ice, which he identified as those of otters and mice. Following the otter tracks, he found a hole leading to an underwater den with 2 leftover fish heads nearby. Unfortunately, as a foreigner, he wasn't interested in eating them, but he saved them as bait for fishing. However, he needed to set up a shelter first, especially since snowfall could occur at any time. Stafford decided to build a lean-to, a common type of shelter in survival shows. First, he connected a robust horizontal beam between 2 trees, then leaned several logs at a 60-degree angle against this beam and covered them with dense spruce branches to prevent them from being blown away by the wind. He also placed some logs on top to weigh them down. While collecting logs, he unexpectedly found a beehive in a broken tree root, containing a piece of black honeycomb. Having not eaten proper food for days, he couldn't resist tasting it immediately. The sweet flavor revived his spirits and energy. He then put extra effort into making his bed with logs and dry grass. Lying down, he felt incredibly comfortable. Because the area was full of pine trees, Stafford found many pine nuts. Sitting in his shelter, he patiently extracted the kernels, placed them on a stone, and ground them into powder to make pine nut cakes for dinner. Trying to grind them with a stone was too slow, so he chewed the nuts instead, which was much faster, though the paste's appearance was less appealing. After forming them into cakes, he baked them over charcoal. After a while, he had 5 pine nut cakes ready. 15 minutes later, they were edible. Though not visually appealing, hunger made them taste like energy-packed balls of protein and fat, far better than any dark cooking his wife Laura might make. Today was very fulfilling as he achieved his goals. On the 5th day, craving some meat, the river fish seemed like the only legal source available. Initially, he tried using inner bark fibers for fishing line, but found them too weak. Lacking other natural materials, he reluctantly took out his emergency medical kit, unraveled some bandage for the line, bent a safety pin to serve as a hook, and used the collected fish heads as bait. He tied the line to a stick and planned to fish through holes in the ice. Using another stick as a probe, he found weak spots in the ice to drill holes and set the fishing rods across them. However, being so close to thin ice was risky. Just as Stafford was setting up the second rod and about to return to camp, he accidentally stepped through the ice and fell into the river. Fortunately, he quickly climbed out. With his clothes soaked, he was at immediate risk of hypothermia, as his body could lose heat 25 times faster than normal. Ed Stafford quickly ran back to camp, converted the long fire into a concentrated star-shaped fire to maximize heat, and used his snowshoes as a rack to dry his completely soaked clothes, wearing only the 2 spare garments he had. His previously good mood instantly plummeted. It took until evening for all his clothes to dry. Luckily, he had eaten well regularly, or his body might not have coped. Now he could only comfort himself that tomorrow would be better. However, survival is never smooth sailing. The next day, both fishing rods yielded nothing. He cut the fish heads smaller and returned them to their place, hoping not to be disappointed again. Entering the 7th day, Stafford's body craved animal protein and fat. Believing anything was possible, he still had some faith in his fishing rods. This time he had no empty hooks. Stafford slid on his knees to the camera, wanting to steam the rainbow trout to retain as much fat as possible, rather than roasting it on a branch. He removed some moss from a nearby fallen tree, not peat moss, which holds water, so he had to soak it in the river. Then, he placed it in the charcoal, sandwiching the trout in the middle. It only took about half an hour to steam the fish to perfection, easily peeling off the skin. The taste was completely different from roasted. It was tender, juicy, and fragrant. Stafford exclaimed it was delicious, making him forget he was shivering in his shelter the day before. Eating the whole fish quickly revitalized him physically and mentally, making his day perfect. Though he couldn't describe his current life as luxurious, he felt he had given his all to meet the challenges posed by the environment, doing himself and his fans justice. Over the next few days, he routinely foraged, fishing for rainbow trout in the lake, collecting pine nuts in the forest, and coexisting harmoniously with the local wildlife. Waking up on the 10th day, he dismantled the lean-to, returning the site to its original state, marking a successful end to this challenge.